I still remember the look on his face when he realized that I knew everything, not just about their affair, but about the money, the clients, and most importantly, the offshore accounts that neither of them thought I could possibly discover. For 2 years, I smiled through dinner parties while my husband paraded his assistant around, thinking I was too naive to notice. Little did he know that while he was busy building his empire with her by his side, I was quietly constructing his downfall, piece by meticulous piece. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The autumn rain tapped against the windows of our Westbrook estate as I watched my husband of 15 years, Nathan, rush around our bedroom, packing for yet another emergency business trip to Miami. The same city where his 26-year-old assistant, Vanessa, had conveniently been sent 2 days earlier to prepare for client meetings. "Rebecca, have you seen my blue Brioni tie? The one with the silver accents?" Nathan called out, barely glancing in my direction as he rifled through his closet. "It's in the 3rd drawer, where it always is," I replied softly, maintaining the same calm, accommodating tone I'd perfected over the years. The same tone that had convinced Nathan that I was utterly clueless about his double life. I handed him the tie, our fingers brushing momentarily. At 45, Nathan Porter was still strikingly handsome. Salt and pepper hair that only enhanced his appearance, a physique maintained by expensive personal trainers, and the confidence that came from building Horizon Financial Partners into one of the most successful investment firms in the Northeast. "What would I do without you?" he said with a distracted smile, the irony of his words lost on him as he checked his watch, the Patek Philippe I had given him for our 10th anniversary. "I've arranged for the housekeeper to come tomorrow instead of Thursday," I told him, playing my part, "and I've canceled our dinner with the Hawthorns on Saturday." Good, he muttered, barely listening as he typed rapidly on his phone. Another message to her, no doubt. What Nathan didn't know, what he had never bothered to find out, was that before I became Rebecca Porter, devoted corporate wife and fixture at charity galas, I had been Rebecca Chen, summa cum laude graduate, in financial forensics and digital security. A career I had willingly set aside when Nathan's star began to rise, convincing myself that supporting his ambitions was enough. "I should be back by Friday at the latest," he said, closing his suitcase with a decisive click. "You know how these compliance meetings can drag on." I nodded sympathetically. Of course, the Dorset account must be quite complex. Nathan froze for just a fraction of a second, enough to confirm what I already knew. There was no Dorset account. It was the name Vanessa used when she booked their hotel rooms, a pathetic inside joke between them. "Rebecca is too busy planning garden parties to know the difference between a hedge fund and a garden hedge." That's what he'd said to her in a text 3 months ago, followed by laughing emojis. "Right. Exactly." He recovered smoothly. "Don't wait for my call tonight. These client dinners can run late." As his town car pulled away from our circular driveway, I waited precisely 30 minutes before walking to my private study, the one room Nathan never entered because women's decorating projects bored him. Behind the tasteful watercolor painting of the Amalfi Coast, where we'd spent our honeymoon, was a state-of-the-art security panel. One press of my finger and the bookshelves on the opposite wall silently slid apart, revealing my true domain. The space contained 3 high-resolution monitors, specialized equipment that would have raised eyebrows at even the most advanced cybersecurity firms, and files, both digital and physical, documenting 2 years of meticulous investigation. "Authentication required," the system prompted as I sat down at the workstation. "Rebecca Chen, access code Delta 7 Epsilon 9. Tatuan. Screens illuminated as layers of encryption fell away. On the left monitor, a GPS tracking system showed Nathan's town car heading toward the private airfield where the company jet awaited. The center screen displayed Horizon Financial's supposedly secure internal communications network. The right, showed surveillance feeds from select areas of the firm's headquarters, installed during renovations that Nathan had been too busy to oversee personally. I pulled up the file labeled Icarus Protocol, named for the Greek figure whose hubris led him to fly too close to the sun. How fitting for what Nathan and Vanessa had been building together over the past 3 years. While Nathan believed I spent my days organizing charity luncheons and getting cosmetic treatments to maintain the perfect corporate wife appearance, I had actually been reconstructing the elaborate fraud scheme he and Vanessa had engineered. Siphoning funds from client accounts into offshore holdings, manipulating investment reports, and securing their golden parachute while setting up junior executives to take the fall when the inevitable crash came. My phone chimed with a text. "The Eagle has landed. Companion arrived yesterday afternoon. Same accommodations as last time." This update came from Marcus, a former military intelligence officer who now worked as a private investigator. On my payroll, not Nathan's. I took a deep breath and opened a secure messaging platform. "Status update?" I typed. 3 responses came. In quick succession, from Elena, my mole in Horizon's accounting department. Final documentation secured. Transfer histories complete. From James, senior investigator at the Financial Crimes Division, and my former colleague from my previous life. Team briefed, warrants ready, awaiting your signal. From Diana, my attorney. All paperwork filed. Under seal. Judge Patterson is standing by. A strange calm settled over me as I surveyed the culmination of years of careful planning. Nathan had always told his friends that he'd lucked out marrying a woman with no interest in the boring details of his business. He'd convinced everyone, including his executive team, that I was simply an attractive ornament who organized perfect dinner parties and maintained our social calendar. Not once had he mentioned my double major in computer science and forensic accounting. Not once had he questioned how I understood complex financial instruments when arrangements needed to be made for our personal portfolio. Not once had he wondered about my friendship with Judge Patterson's wife, or why I insisted on maintaining relationships with my former colleagues. Our marriage counselor, whom Nathan had stopped seeing after 3 sessions because Rebecca just needs to accept that busy executives work long hours, had suggested I find a hobby. If only she knew that catching financial criminals had been my career before I met Nathan. Some skills never fade. They just wait for the right moment to re-emerge. I opened the safe hidden beneath the floorboards and removed the external hard drive containing irrefutable evidence of every transaction, every falsified document, and every betrayal, both professional and personal. Tomorrow, while Nathan and Vanessa enjoyed the Miami sunshine, blissfully unaware, I would be in the office of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, then meeting with Horizon's board of directors. "Mrs. Porter?" I turned to see Mrs. Collins, our chief housekeeper of 12 years, standing in the doorway of my study, the hidden room now concealed again behind the bookshelves. "Will you be dining alone this evening?" she asked, her eyes reflecting a knowing sympathy. Nothing escaped Mrs. Collins's notice, including Vanessa's earring found in Nathan's suit pocket last year, which she had quietly placed on my vanity, without comment. "Actually, I'll be going out tonight," I replied, closing the portfolio containing copies of Nathan's forged client authorizations. "And Mrs. Collins? You might want to take tomorrow off. I suspect things will be rather hectic around here." As she nodded and withdrew, I turned back to my desk and picked up the photograph taken on our wedding day. Nathan looked triumphant rather than joyful, his arm around my waist possessive rather than loving. I had been so blinded by what I thought was love that I had missed all the warning signs. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The intercom buzzed, announcing the arrival of my car. I gathered my coat and the secure briefcase containing selected documents for tomorrow's meetings. As I walked through our cavernous marble foyer, I paused to look at the life Nathan thought I was content with. The showcased wealth, The perfect appearance, the silent, supportive wife. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. Landed safe. Don't bother waiting up. I typed back the response he'd expect. Enjoy your meetings. Miss you already. What I didn't add was that by this time tomorrow, Nathan would understand exactly who he had been sleeping beside for 15 years, and exactly what happens when you underestimate the woman who knows all your secrets. The car pulled away from the estate as darkness fell, headlights cutting through the rain that had turned from a drizzle to a downpour. How appropriate, the calm before the storm had passed. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning that neither Nathan nor his young girlfriend were prepared for. A revelation of secrets that would shatter the empire they thought was safely built on my ignorance. After all, as my father used to say before he passed away, the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone thinks doesn't matter. Nathan was about to learn just how dangerous I could be. The sleek black Audi pulled up to a nondescript building in downtown Portland, miles away from the upscale financial district where Horizon Financial's gleaming headquarters dominated the skyline. Few would connect Rebecca Porter, the elegant corporate wife, with this converted warehouse that housed one of the most sophisticated private intelligence operations on the East Coast. Good evening, Mrs. Porter, said Raymond, the former military security specialist who managed the facility's security. His respectful nod contained none of the condescension I'd grown accustomed to from Nathan's colleagues. Evening, Raymond. Is everyone assembled? Yes, ma'am. Conference room C, as requested. I strode through the retinal scanner and into the building I'd purchased through a series of shell companies 3 years ago, when I'd first discovered a discrepancy in Horizon's quarterly reports, a tiny numerical error that Nathan had dismissed as accounting mumbo-jumbo when I'd casually mentioned it over dinner. That dismissal had been the first thread I'd pulled, unraveling a tapestry of fraud that had taken me years to fully map out. Now that map was spread across the digital display table in conference room C, where my team awaited. Rebecca, Elena greeted me, rising from her seat. At 52, Elena Rodriguez had been CFO at a major bank before a heart attack had prompted her retirement. At least, that's what her official biography stated. In reality, she'd joined my team, using her expertise to trace the labyrinth of financial transactions that Nathan and Vanessa had constructed. The Miami situation? I asked. Setting down my briefcase, James Woodward, my FBI contact, pulled up surveillance footage on the main screen. They arrived separately but met in the presidential suite at the Palm Harbor Resort. Room service for 2, champagne, the works. His tone was professional, but his eyes held sympathy. We'd dated briefly in graduate school before life had taken us in different directions. I nodded, feeling nothing at the confirmation of what I already knew. The pain of betrayal had dulled long ago, replaced by a cold determination that had fueled countless nights of investigation. Let's focus on what matters, I said, directing their attention to the financial flowcharts. Show me how deep this goes. For the next hour, we reviewed the evidence, all of which would be presented to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., followed by an emergency board meeting at Horizon at 11 a.m. The structure is elegant, I'll give them that, said Diana Zhang, my attorney and old college roommate. They've created a perfect funnel system. Client funds go in through legitimate investments, get routed through these shell companies in the Caymans and Belize, then emerge cleansed in these Singapore accounts. How much are we talking about? Asked Marcus, leaning forward to examine the numbers. Nearly $180 million over 3 years, Elena replied. Small enough amounts from each client to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but substantial in aggregate. And the junior executives they've set up to take the fall? I asked, bringing up the personnel files of 3 young financial analysts who had unwittingly signed off on documents Nathan had assured them were routine. All their electronic signatures are on the compliance documents, James confirmed. When this blows up, the paper trail leads directly to them. Waterford, Jenkins, and Chen would face federal charges while Nathan and Vanessa walk away clean if We hadn't intervened. I thought of Carol Chen, no relation, the brilliant young analyst who had reminded me of myself 15 years ago. Ambitious, dedicated, and now potentially facing prison because she'd trusted her boss. The same boss who was currently enjoying champagne with his mistress in Miami, believing his plan was flawless. Tomorrow, those 3 analysts receive full immunity in exchange for their cooperation, I said firmly. I want that in writing before we move forward. Diana nodded, making a note on her tablet. Already arranged. Judge Patterson signed off on it this afternoon. What about Nathan's inner circle? Marcus asked. Bradley, Thompson, and Rivera? Are they involved? This was the question that had kept me awake for months. Nathan's 3 closest friends and senior partners at Horizon. Had they known? Were they complicit? Thompson is clean, Elena said, pulling up his financial records. He actually raised concerns about some of these transactions 6 months ago. But Nathan shut him down, told him it was a special project for a sensitive client. Rivera is more complicated, James added. He signed off on some questionable transfers, but our surveillance suggests he was manipulated rather than actively participating. Nathan has leverage over him. We found evidence of Rivera's gambling problem that Nathan has been covering up. And Bradley? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Charles Bradley had been Nathan's roommate in college, his best man, at our wedding, and godfather to the child we'd never had. Marcus's expression confirmed my suspicions. Fully aware and actively participating, he and Nathan have a separate operation running through Eastern Europe. Different accounts, same playbook. Bradley's wife filed for divorce last year, if you recall. I did recall. Nathan had called Melissa Bradley a gold-digging bitch for demanding a forensic accountant review their finances during the divorce proceedings. The case had mysteriously settled almost overnight, with Melissa receiving far less than she was entitled to. Now I understand why. Contact Melissa, I instructed Diana. Discreetly. She may have information we can use. As my team continued their briefing, my mind drifted to the day I'd first met Vanessa Morgan. Nathan had introduced her as the brightest new talent at Horizon, his hand lingering on her lower back just a fraction too long. I'd watched her assess me with a quick, dismissive glance, taking in my conservative dress, my perfect coiffure, my polite smile, and visibly relax, clearly deciding I posed no threat. How different would things have been if she'd known about the honors thesis I'd written on detecting financial fraud? Or the 3 years I'd spent working with a specialized FBI task force before meeting Nathan? Perhaps she might have been more cautious about leaving her fingerprints all over the elaborate scheme she and Nathan had constructed, believing the trophy wife would never notice. Rebecca? Elena's voice pulled me back to the present. There's something else you should see. She slid a document across the table. A life insurance policy taken out on me 6 months ago. $10 million. Double indemnity for accidental death. The room fell silent as I processed this new information. So that was the endgame. Once the money was secured offshore, once the fall guys were in place, I would have suffered a tragic accident. Perhaps a car crash or a fall down our sweeping marble staircase. Poor Nathan, losing his devoted wife so suddenly. How fortunate he'd have the beautiful, brilliant Vanessa to console him. Well, I said, my voice steady despite the ice in my veins. It seems I've overstayed my welcome in my own marriage. We should move up the timeline, James urged, concern evident in his voice. If they suspect you know anything. Nathan doesn't suspect a thing, I assured him. He still thinks I'm attending the Henderson Charity Gala in Westbrook tonight. My absence won't register until much later. I opened my briefcase and removed the final piece of our strategy, a red file containing information so explosive it had taken me months to verify its authenticity. Tomorrow we don't just expose the financial fraud, I said, placing the file on the table. We reveal everything. Are you sure? Diana asked quietly. This goes beyond Nathan. It implicates board, members, politicians, even that federal judge in Massachusetts. I'm sure, I replied, thinking of every condescending smile, every patronizing pat on the shoulder, every conversation that had stopped when I entered the room. They chose to build their success on fraud and corruption. They chose to view me as nothing more than Nathan's decorative accessory. Tomorrow, they learn the cost of those choices. I stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress, a habit from years of maintaining the perfect appearance expected of Nathan Porter's wife. Review your assignments once more. Get some rest. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., we will gather at the FBI field office. By noon, Horizon Financial will be under federal investigation, and Nathan will be learning what it means to underestimate the wrong woman. As the team dispersed, Elena lingered behind. What about you? Where will you go tonight? I smiled, thinking of the modern apartment I'd maintained under my maiden name, a space Nathan knew nothing about, decorated not with the ostentatious luxury he preferred, but with the clean, minimalist aesthetic I'd always loved. I'm going home, I said simply. The real one. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights. My driver held the door as I slid into the back seat, mentally reviewing tomorrow's sequence of events. My phone chimed with a text from Nathan. Client dinner running late. Making real progress. Don't wait up. Attached was a photo of him and several men in suits, raising glasses around a restaurant table. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen, though I knew exactly where she was, waiting in the presidential suite, perhaps slipping into the lingerie Nathan had charged to his business account last week. I put the phone away without responding. Tonight would be the last night Nathan Porter spent in blissful ignorance, believing himself untouchable, superior, and cleverly deceiving his naive wife. Tomorrow, the carefully constructed facade would come crashing down, and Nathan would learn that he hadn't been the one in control after all. As we drove through the sleeping city, I felt the weight of 15 years of pretense lifting from my shoulders. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would no longer be living a lie. The deception was about to end, just not in the way Nathan had planned. The morning sun cast long shadows through the blinds of my private apartment as I prepared for the day that would change everything. I'd slept soundly for the first time in months, unburdened by the need to maintain pretenses in the mansion Nathan considered home. This space, a sleek penthouse in a converted industrial building on the edge of the arts district, reflected the woman I'd been before Nathan and the woman I would be again after today. Clean lines, modern furniture, walls lined with books on finance, cybersecurity, and art. My actual interests, not the vapid celebrity biographies and decorating magazines that filled the shelves of what Nathan called Rebecca's reading room. At the estate. My phone buzzed with a message from James. FBI team assembled. Director wants pre-brief at 8:30. As I dressed, I chose my armor carefully, not the pastel Chanel suits Nathan preferred for his wife, but a sharply tailored charcoal Armani pantsuit, crisp white shirt, and the platinum watch my father had given me when I graduated with honors. The sapphire earrings, my mother's, completed the transformation from Rebecca Porter, trophy wife, to Rebecca Chen, financial crime specialist. The intercom buzzed. "Car is ready, Ms. Chen," said the building's security officer, using my maiden name, the name on the apartment's deed. Downstairs, Diana waited in the black SUV, legal briefcase open on her lap. "Morning," she said, handing me a coffee from my favorite local shop, not the overpriced chain Nathan frequented. Final review before we head in? We spent the drive downtown, going through the sequence of events that would unfold over the next few hours. The federal agents were already in position. Search warrants for Horizon's offices, Nathan and Vanessa's residences, and the offshore banking records had been executed at midnight. The bank accounts were frozen. The digital evidence had been secured. "What's Nathan doing now?" I asked Marcus, who sat in the front passenger seat monitoring the surveillance feeds, still at the hotel in Miami. Just ordered room service breakfast for 2. He hesitated, then added, "He tried calling you twice. In the last hour." I glanced at my phone. 3 missed calls from Nathan, and a text. "Call me ASAP, something's happening at the office." So it had begun. The board members would have been notified of the federal investigation by now. Nathan's carefully constructed world was already starting to crumble, though he didn't yet know the source of the destruction. The SUV pulled up to the federal building. James met us at the secure entrance, bypassing the public lobby. "Everyone's waiting in the conference room," he said, leading us through a series of security checkpoints. "The director is impressed with the case you've built." "He should be," Diana muttered beside me. "It's more thorough than what his own agents typically produce." The conference room fell silent as I entered. A dozen federal agents, the director of the Financial Crimes Division, and the U.S. Attorney for the district rose as I was introduced. Not as Nathan Porter's wife, but as the key witness and case architect who had spent 3 years documenting one of the largest private investment frauds since Bernie Madoff. "Mrs. Porter, or do you prefer Ms. Chen?" the director began. "Ms. Chen, please," I replied, taking my seat at the table. For the next hour, I walked them through the evidence, explaining the intricate web of financial transactions, the falsified documents, the manipulated client accounts. I detailed how Nathan and Vanessa had systematically targeted wealthy, elderly clients with limited financial literacy, how they'd created phantom investment returns while siphoning the actual funds offshore. "And you're certain your husband had no idea of your background in financial forensics?" the U.S. Attorney asked, clearly struggling to believe someone could be so oblivious. "Nathan sees what he expects to see," I explained. He expected a decorative, supportive wife who managed his social calendar and hosted his dinner parties. That's what he saw. My phone vibrated continuously throughout the meeting, Nathan becoming increasingly desperate as news of the federal raid on Horizon's offices spread through the financial community. I let each call go to voicemail, imagining his growing panic, as he tried to contain a situation rapidly spinning beyond his control. As the briefing concluded, the director shook my hand. "Remarkable work, Ms. Chen. We'll take it from here." "No," I said firmly, surprising him. "I'll be at the Horizon board meeting at 11. This isn't just about federal charges. This is about the 3 innocent analysts who were set up to take the fall, about the corporate culture that allowed this fraud to flourish, and about ensuring everyone involved faces consequences, not just legal ones." The director exchanged glances with the U.S. Attorney, who nodded slightly. "Very well. Agent Woodward will accompany you." As we left the federal building, my phone rang again. Not Nathan this time, but Charles Bradley, his closest friend and accomplice. "Rebecca," he said when I answered, his normally smooth voice strained with panic. "Thank God. Where are you?" "The FBI is at the office. They're saying something about fraud investigations. Nathan's not answering his phone." "How strange," I replied coolly. "Have you tried contacting Vanessa Morgan? They're together in Miami, I believe." A lengthy silence followed. "Rebecca," he finally said, his tone shifting to one of careful calculation. "Whatever you think is happening, we can discuss this. There may be misunderstandings that can be cleared up." The only misunderstanding, Charles, was yours and Nathan's. Belief that I was too stupid to notice what was happening. "I'll see you at the board meeting at 11. I suggest you bring your lawyer." I ended the call before he could respond. "That felt good," Diana observed with a small smile. "It did," I admitted. "Though this is just the beginning." The SUV turned toward Horizon's headquarters, the gleaming 50-story tower that dominated the financial district. Nathan had once told me the building was shaped like an upward arrow to symbolize the ever-rising fortunes of their clients. The irony wasn't lost on me now. As we approached, I could see news vans already gathering, reporters sensing a major story unfolding. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Thompson and Rivera are cooperating fully. Bradley is trying to destroy documents, but our people intercepted him. Nathan is on a private jet back from Miami. ETA 12:30. Too late. By then, everything would be over. We pulled into the private entrance of the parking garage, where security personnel, now accompanied by federal agents, nodded respectfully as I exited the vehicle. The executive elevator, which I'd only ridden as a guest at company functions, whisked us to the top floor where the boardroom occupied the entire east wing, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Outside the boardroom, Vanessa's assistant Megan stood wide-eyed as we approached. She'd always been polite to me, one of the few at Horizon who treated Nathan's wife as more than an inconvenience. "Mrs. Porter," she stammered, clearly confused by my presence during a crisis. "The board is already assembled, but Mr. Porter isn't here yet, and—" "Thank you, Megan," I said gently. "And it's Ms. Chen now. I know exactly where Mr. Porter is and exactly what's happening. You might want to update your resume, by the way. This company will be under new management very soon." The boardroom doors opened to reveal 12 people. In various states of shock and anger, the 10 board members, the company's chief legal officer, and Charles Bradley, who rose halfway out of his seat when he saw me, his face draining of color. "Rebecca," he started. "This isn't the place for Ms. Chen," corrected Walter Green, the 70-year-old chairman of the board, whom I'd known for years through charity functions. "I believe that's how you prefer to be addressed professionally." His eyes, sharp despite his age, held a knowing look. "Please join us. I believe you have information relevant to the situation unfolding this morning." I took the empty seat at the opposite end of the table from where Nathan usually sat, Diana and James flanking me on either side. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. For those who don't know me beyond the company holiday parties, I began, my voice steady. "Let me introduce myself properly. I'm Rebecca Chen, formerly of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, specializing in investment fraud and money laundering. Before that, I was the youngest forensic accounting specialist, ever hired by Deloitte's Special Investigations Unit." The shock in the room was palpable. Charles Bradley looked physically ill. "For the past 3 years," I continued, opening my briefcase and removing a thick dossier, "I have been documenting the systematic fraud perpetrated by Nathan Porter, Vanessa Morgan, and several accomplices within this company. This morning, I provided federal authorities with irrefutable evidence of their crimes." I slid copies of the dossier to each person at the table. "What you're looking at is a summary of how $180 million of client funds were diverted to offshore accounts, how investment returns were falsified, and how 3 junior analysts, Waterford, Jenkins, and Chen, were deliberately set up to take the fall when the scheme inevitably collapsed." The room erupted in voices, denials, questions, expressions of outrage. Walter Green silenced them with a raised hand, his eyes never leaving mine. "And now," I said, my gaze settling on Charles Bradley, who had begun to sweat visibly, "we will discuss how this fraud extends beyond Nathan and Vanessa to include others in this room." The real reckoning was about to begin, and as I prepared to reveal the evidence I'd spent years accumulating, I thought of Nathan, currently somewhere in the air between Miami and Portland, still believing he could control the situation upon arrival. He would soon discover how wrong he had been, about the fraud, about his escape plan, and most of all, about the wife he had so fatally underestimated. The Horizon Financial boardroom had transformed from a symbol of power into a crime scene. Board members flipped through the dossiers I'd provided, expressions ranging from shock to outrage to, in a few cases, poorly concealed panic. "This is preposterous," Charles Bradley finally sputtered, slamming his copy shut. "These are baseless accusations from a vindictive wife. Nothing more." Walter Green, the board chairman, removed his reading glasses slowly. "Is that so, Charles? Because these transfer authorizations bear your signature, as does this compliance waiver for the Cayman accounts." "Electronic signatures can be forged," Charles insisted, his confident facade cracking. "Nathan trusts Rebecca with everything. She could have accessed any document, planted any evidence. I allowed myself a small smile. Interesting theory. Unfortunately for you, every document in that file has been authenticated by forensic specialists. Furthermore, I nodded to James, who opened his laptop and turned the screen toward the board. We have surveillance footage. The video began playing. Charles and Nathan in Nathan's office after hours, laughing as they discussed how to structure these special transactions to avoid regulatory scrutiny. The best part is, Nathan's voice came through clearly. If anything ever goes wrong, Rebecca's signature is on our family trust documents. We can claim she was involved all along. Charles's face on the screen contorted into a smirk. That's assuming anyone would believe your decorative little wife understands anything about financial structures. Exactly. Nathan laughed. She still thinks a shell company has something to do with marine biology. The boardroom remained deathly silent as the video continued, detailing exactly how they planned to frame the junior analysts if regulators ever caught wind of the fraud. When was this recorded? Demanded Eliza Winters, the only female board member besides myself. 14 months ago, I replied. And before you ask, yes, it was legally obtained through a warrant as part of an ongoing federal investigation that predates my involvement. Charles had gone completely pale. I want my lawyer. I'm sure you do, I said calmly. He's being notified of your imminent arrest as we speak. Walter Green cleared his throat. Ms. Chen, while this evidence against Mr. Bradley and your husband appears substantial, what about Vanessa Morgan? And you mentioned other accomplices. I pulled out a second file, thinner but no less damning. Ms. Morgan joined Horizon 3 years ago, shortly after completing her MBA. Within 6 months, she was promoted to work directly under Nathan as his executive assistant. Their affair began approximately 1 month after her promotion. I distributed copies of this second file. What you're looking at now is evidence of how Ms. Morgan specifically targeted wealthy elderly clients, particularly those with early signs of cognitive decline, and redirected their investments into the fraudulent schemes. She personally falsified their risk assessment profiles to justify moving their conservative portfolios into special opportunity investments that Nathan controlled. Dear God, muttered one of the older board members, a retired banker named Harrison. The Wilsons are in here. They're in their 80s. He has Parkinson's. She's in the early stages of dementia. They trusted us with their entire life savings, $4.2 million, I confirmed, of which approximately $3.1 million has been diverted to accounts in Singapore. The remaining funds were used to generate the falsified returns that kept them from asking questions. The chief legal officer, who had been frantically taking notes throughout my presentation, finally spoke up. The company's exposure here, it's catastrophic. Beyond the criminal charges, the civil liability alone could destroy Horizon. Yes, I agreed, unless decisive action is taken immediately. Walter Green studied me carefully. You've clearly thought this through, Ms. Chen. What exactly are you proposing? Before I could answer, the boardroom doors burst open. Standing there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, was Thomas Rivera, Nathan's other closest lieutenant, whom my team had identified as being manipulated rather than a willing participant. Ms. Chen, he said, ignoring everyone else in the room. I've just cooperated fully with the federal agents. I've told them everything I know about the fraud. I want to make it clear that I was coerced by Nathan and Charles. They threatened to expose my gambling problem if I didn't sign off on the transfers. We know, Mr. Rivera, I said. That's why you're not in handcuffs like Mr. Bradley is about to be. On cue, 2 federal agents appeared behind Rivera in the doorway. James nodded to them, and they moved toward Charles Bradley, who had begun desperately, searching for an exit. Charles Bradley, one agent announced. You're under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and attempted obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. As Bradley was escorted from the room, still protesting his innocence, Walter Green turned back to me. Your proposal, Ms. Chen? Immediate removal of Nathan Porter as CEO and Vanessa Morgan from her position. Full cooperation with federal authorities. A complete audit of all client accounts by an independent third party. And most importantly, a fund established to make all clients whole, starting with the most vulnerable, like the Wilsons. And where exactly would this money come from? Asked the chief legal officer. If the funds have been moved offshore, the company's insurance will cover a portion, I explained. The assets of those involved will be seized and liquidated. But yes, Horizon will take a significant financial hit. The alternative, however, is complete collapse once this becomes public. I let that sink in before continuing. There's also the matter of the 3 analysts who were set up to take the fall. I want them cleared publicly, compensated for the damage to their reputations, and offered secure positions if they wish to stay. Walter Green looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each board member. One by one, they nodded their agreement. Very well, he said finally. I believe we need to call an emergency shareholder meeting to formalize these changes. But in the meantime, the board authorizes me to take immediate action in line with Ms. Chen's recommendations. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Nathan's plane just landed. He's on his way to the office. Perfect timing. I believe we're about to have another visitor, I announced to the room. Nathan has just arrived back in Portland. The tension in the boardroom ratcheted up several notches. Walter Green's expression hardened. Perhaps, Ms. Chen, would you prefer to absent yourself when he arrives? This confrontation could become unpleasant. I smiled, thinking of all the years I'd spent playing the accommodating wife, stepping aside to avoid unpleasantness. Thank you for your concern, Walter, but I've been preparing for this confrontation for 3 years. I wouldn't miss it for the world. While we waited, Walter Green officially suspended Nathan as CEO, with the board's unanimous approval. Security protocols were updated to revoke Nathan's access to all systems. His office was being sealed as evidence. 23 minutes later, the boardroom doors flew open once again. Nathan Porter stood framed in the doorway, his customary polished appearance noticeably frayed around the edges. His eyes swept the room, widening slightly when they landed on me seated at the far end of the table. Rebecca, what are you doing here? He demanded, confusion momentarily overtaking his anger. Then his eyes narrowed as he took in my attire, my position at the table, the federal agent standing beside me. What the hell is going on? Walter Green stood. Nathan, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Effective immediately. You are suspended from all duties at Horizon Financial pending a full investigation into serious allegations of fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations. Nathan's face flushed with rage. This is absurd. What evidence could possibly... He stopped abruptly as his eyes fell on the open dossier in front of Green. I could see the exact moment recognition dawned. Where did you get those documents? From me, I said calmly, rising to my feet. Your wife. The woman you've been systematically underestimating for 15 years. Nathan stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You? He whispered, disbelief written across his features. That's not possible. You don't know anything about financial fraud? Offshore structures? Electronic evidence gathering? I finished for him. Actually, Nathan, that was my specialty before I met you. Something you might have discovered if you'd ever bothered to ask about my life before I became Mrs. Nathan Porter. The color drained from his face as the reality of the situation began to sink in. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, finding none. Where's Charles? He demanded. Mr. Bradley is currently in federal custody, James replied professionally, as Ms. Morgan will be, once federal agents in Miami complete their search of your hotel suite. You had us under surveillance? Nathan's shock was almost comical. For how long? Long enough to document everything, I replied. The fraud, the affair, the plan to frame innocent employees, and most recently, the life insurance policy you took out on me. Tell me, Nathan, was I going to have a tragic accident before or after you moved the last of the money offshore? The flash of guilt in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. A collective gasp went through the boardroom as the board members realized the full extent of Nathan's plans. "You don't understand," Nathan said, his voice dropping as he attempted to regain control of the situation. "Rebecca, we can talk about this privately. There are aspects of the business you don't comprehend." "Actually, I comprehend everything," I replied, opening my laptop and turning it to face him. On the screen was a complete map of the financial fraud, every transaction, every falsified document, every offshore account, including the fact that you and Vanessa were planning to disappear next month after the Hamilton merger was complete. You had new identities prepared, plane tickets to Singapore, a villa purchased under a shell company name. Nathan's face contorted, with a mixture of rage and fear as he realized the thoroughness of my investigation. For a man who had built his life on the illusion of control, the complete loss of it was devastating. "You've destroyed everything," he whispered. "No, Nathan," I corrected him. "You destroyed everything. I'm just making sure you face the consequences." As federal agents moved toward Nathan to place him under arrest, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sense of closure as I watched the carefully constructed facade of Nathan Porter, financial genius, crumble before my eyes. The man who had replaced me with his young girlfriend was about to discover the true cost of his betrayal, and the darkest secrets were only just beginning to emerge. The federal agents had just led Nathan from the boardroom, his expression one of stunned disbelief. A man watching his carefully constructed world disintegrate before his eyes. In his wake, a heavy silence fell over the Horizon boardroom as the remaining executives processed the sheer magnitude of what had just been revealed. Walter Green was the first to speak. "Ms. Chen, I believe we've only scratched the surface of this situation. You mentioned something about the Hamilton merger?" I nodded, bringing up a new set of files on my laptop. The Hamilton financial acquisition was to be the final act in Nathan and Vanessa's scheme. Hamilton manages over $2 billion in client assets, primarily for family trusts and retirement funds. The chief legal officer visibly paled. "Are you suggesting they plan to siphon off a significant percentage?" "During the system's integration," I confirmed. "The merger documentation includes hidden clauses granting Nathan and a special executive committee, consisting of himself, Bradley, and 2 board members, extraordinary authority during the transition period." All eyes turned to the 2 board members I hadn't named. "Who?" demanded Eliza Winters. I met her gaze directly. "Richard Harmon and Spencer Wright." The boardroom erupted. Richard Harmon, a silver-haired man in his 60s, immediately began protesting his innocence. Spencer Wright, younger and usually more reserved, simply closed his eyes, his silence more damning than any denial. "That's preposterous," Harmon shouted, rising to his feet. "I've been on this board for 12 years. My reputation is beyond reproach." "Is it?" I asked quietly, sliding a specific document from my folder. "Because this offshore account in the British Virgin Islands seems to be registered to a shell company that lists your daughter's birth date as its registration number. Coincidence?" James stepped forward, placing a hand on Harmon's shoulder. "Mr. Harmon, federal agents would like to speak with you as well. If you'd come with me, please." As Harmon was escorted out, still protesting, Spencer Wright opened his eyes. "How did you figure it out?" he asked, his voice surprisingly calm. "The pattern of board votes," I replied. "You and Harmon consistently supported Nathan's most questionable proposals. But what really gave you away was the property in Bali purchased by another shell company, one that matched the naming convention of Vanessa's Singapore accounts." Wright nodded slowly. "I never intended. It started small, approving transactions, without proper scrutiny. Then came the special accounts. By the time I realized the scale of what Nathan was doing, I was already implicated. "And yet you continued," Walter Green said, disappointment evident in his voice. They had been friends for decades. "I'm prepared to cooperate fully," Wright said, looking directly at me. "There are things even you don't know, Ms. Chen." That caught my attention. "What things?" "The Hamilton merger isn't the end of it. There's a larger consortium involved, the Blackwood Group. They specialize in acquiring distressed financial firms after incidents." His emphasis on the last word sent a chill through the room. "You're suggesting this fraud was meant to damage Horizon?" Walter asked incredulously. "Not originally," Wright explained. "It began as simple greed, Nathan and Vanessa stealing from main clients. But about 18 months ago, Nathan was approached by someone from Blackwood. They offered to help hide the fraud in exchange for a piece of the action. But their real goal was to ultimately acquire Horizon at a fraction of its value. Once the scandal broke, I exchanged glances with Diana, whose expression mirrored my own concern. This was an angle we hadn't anticipated. "Who is Blackwood?" I asked. "A private consortium of former Wall Street executives with political connections," Wright replied. "The public face is Julian Blackwood, but the real power is a woman named Catherine Sterling." The name hit me like a physical blow. Catherine Sterling, my former mentor at the FBI, who had abruptly retired 8 years ago after a controversial case involving a prominent senator's financial dealings. The case had been dropped, the evidence mysteriously compromised. "Catherine, Sterling approached Nathan directly?" I asked, working to keep my voice steady. Wright nodded. "At the Whitebridge Gala last year, the one you skipped because of a migraine." I remembered that night clearly, not a migraine, but the discovery of a particularly damning set of transfers that had required my immediate attention. The irony was not lost on me. "There's more," Wright continued, his composure cracking slightly. "Sterling has a particular interest in Horizon's new blockchain division, specifically Project Lazarus." Walter Green's expression darkened. "Project Lazarus is classified. Only 5 people in this company know about it." 6, Wright corrected. "Nathan brought Sterling into the loop 3 months ago. Project Lazarus, Horizon's experimental platform for instantaneous cross-border transactions, capable of moving billions without the usual regulatory delays. In the right hands, it was revolutionary. In the wrong hands, I need to make a call," I said, standing abruptly. "Diana, stay here and continue the debrief. James, get this information to the Federal Task Force immediately. Wright needs protection, now." In the privacy of Nathan's former office, now a crime scene with evidence markers dotting the luxurious furniture, I placed a secure call to Marcus. "We have a complication," I said when he answered. "Catherine Sterling is involved." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You're Catherine Sterling? The one who—" "Yes," I cut him off. "Run a full background on the Blackwood Group. And I need surveillance on Sterling immediately. Also, contact Elena. Have her do a deep dive into Project Lazarus. If Sterling's been given access, we need to know exactly what she's seen." As I ended the call, I noticed a small anomaly in the bookshelf behind Nathan's desk. A slight misalignment in the wood grain of what appeared to be a solid panel. Intrigued, I examined it more closely, running my fingers along the edge until I felt a subtle catch. The panel slid silently open, revealing a hidden safe with a biometric lock. Nathan's private safe, not mentioned in any of the company records, not included in the federal search warrants. My heart raced as I considered the possibilities of what might be inside. I sent a quick text to James. "Hidden safe in Nathan's office. Biometric lock. Need technical team." Within minutes, a forensic technician was carefully bypassing the safe's security measures. The process was painstaking, designed to preserve any evidence without triggering potential fail-safes that might destroy the contents. When the safe finally opened, its contents were not what I had expected. No cash. No bearer. Bonds. No incriminating documents. Instead, a single USB drive and a handwritten letter addressed to Catherine. The technician carefully bagged both items as evidence, but not before I glimpsed the first line of the letter. If you're reading this, our contingency has failed. Back in the boardroom, the situation had evolved further. Spencer Wright was providing detailed testimony about the extent of the Blackwood Group's infiltration into Horizon's operations. 2 more board members had been implicated in various aspects of the fraud, though apparently unwittingly. Sterling approached them individually, Wright explained, made each one feel special, like they were being brought into an exclusive inner circle. Most had no idea others were involved, or the true extent of what they were facilitating. Diana pulled me aside as I re-entered. "We have a problem. Vanessa Morgan has disappeared." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean disappeared? She was in the hotel in Miami under surveillance." "She never returned to the hotel last night," Diana explained. "The agents waited until this morning to make their move, assuming she was with Nathan. When they entered the suite, they found evidence she'd packed hurriedly and left. Nathan apparently didn't know. He seemed genuinely shocked when they questioned him about her whereabouts. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. She's Sterling's insurance policy, I realized. Nathan was always the fall guy if things went wrong. Vanessa is the real connection to Blackwood. Walter Green joined our huddle, his face grave. "There's more bad news. Someone attempted to access Project Lazarus remotely 20 minutes ago. The security team blocked it, but they were using Nathan's credentials." "Not Nathan," I said with certainty. "He's in federal custody. It has to be Vanessa." "Or Sterling," Diana added. I turned to the federal agents who had remained in the boardroom. "We need to escalate this immediately. This is no longer just financial fraud. We're looking at potential national security implications if Project Lazarus is compromised." As the agents made their calls, I stepped away to gather my thoughts. The case had just expanded exponentially beyond Nathan's betrayal and financial crimes. Catherine Sterling, brilliant, ruthless, and intimately familiar with how federal investigations worked, was now in play, with Vanessa Morgan as her operative. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Found something. Sterling's name on visitor log at Horizon Singapore office 3 weeks ago. Meeting with Vanessa, not Nathan. The final confirmation of my suspicions. Nathan, for all his arrogance and criminality, had been a puppet, first manipulated by Vanessa, then by Sterling through Vanessa. His affair, his greed, and his underestimation of his wife had made him the perfect mark." A bitter smile crossed my lips as I realized the irony. Nathan had replaced me with a younger woman who had been using him all along, just as he had used others throughout his career. As I rejoined the group in the boardroom, Walter Green was addressing the remaining board members. "Given these extraordinary circumstances, we need to take unprecedented measures to secure the company and protect our clients." He turned to me, his expression somber but resolute. "Ms. Chen, in light of your unique qualifications and intimate knowledge of this situation, the board would like to offer you a position as special advisor during this crisis. We need someone who understands both the financial fraud and this new threat to Project Lazarus." The request caught me off guard. After years of working in the shadows, meticulously building my case against Nathan, the thought of stepping into a formal role at Horizon, the company that had been at the center of my husband's betrayal, seemed surreal. Yet I understood the strategic necessity. No one else had my complete perspective on the interlocking pieces of this conspiracy. "I'll accept on one condition," I said finally. "Complete transparency moving forward. No more hidden projects, no more secret committees, no more privileged access." Walter nodded gravely. "Agreed. Now, what's our next move regarding Sterling and Vanessa Morgan?" I looked around the room at the remnants of Nathan's empire. now a battlefield in a much larger war than anyone had anticipated. "We go on offense," I replied, my mind already formulating a strategy. "Sterling thinks she's the puppet master, the one who sees all the strings. It's time to show her what happens when she underestimates the wrong woman. Again." The Hunt 4. Vanessa Morgan and Catherine Sterling was about to begin, and with it, the next phase of a conspiracy far darker than a husband's betrayal with his young girlfriend. The next 12 hours unfolded at a dizzying pace. The glass-walled crisis room on Horizon's 48th floor had transformed into an impromptu command center, with federal agents, cybersecurity specialists, and my own team working in orchestrated chaos to unravel the Blackwood conspiracy while simultaneously tracking Vanessa Morgan's movements. "We have her on surveillance at Miami International at 9:42 p.m. yesterday," reported Marcus, projecting a grainy security camera image onto the main screen. The timestamp showed Vanessa, her distinctive red hair partially concealed under a baseball cap, moving briskly through the terminal. "What flight?" I asked, studying the image. "That's where it gets interesting," Marcus replied. "According to airport records, she boarded a flight to London. But we have confirmation from British authorities that she never cleared immigration there. She switched identities mid-journey," I concluded, "probably during the layover in New York." Diana, who had been coordinating with international law enforcement, nodded in agreement. "We're pulling passenger manifests for all connecting flights from JFK within the relevant time frame, but don't bother," I interrupted. "Sterling would have arranged private transportation. Check charter flights, diplomatic shuttles, anything that bypasses normal security channels." Elena entered the room, carrying a stack of documents and looking grim. "I've completed the deep dive on Project Lazarus," she announced, distributing copies of her findings. "It's worse than we thought." I quickly scanned the technical specifications, my concern growing with each page. Project Lazarus wasn't just a blockchain-based transaction platform. It was designed to interface directly with central banking systems in 12 countries, potentially allowing instantaneous, untraceable movement of funds on a scale that could destabilize entire economies. "Who authorized this?" demanded Walter Green, who had remained at Horizon through the night despite his age. "The project was compartmentalized," Elena explained. "Different teams worked on different components, none with the full picture. Only Nathan and the chief technology officer understood its true capabilities." "Where is the CTO now?" I asked. "Dr. Liam Chen? On a research trip to Singapore for the past 2 weeks," Elena replied, giving me a meaningful look. "No relation to you, I assume?" "None," I confirmed, though the coincidence of the surname felt symbolic somehow. "Get me everything on him: background, associates, travel history for the past 3 years." James entered with an update from the Federal Custody Center where Nathan was being held. "Porter is talking, but his information seems limited." According to his statement, Vanessa approached him about involving Blackwood, presenting it as an opportunity to better conceal their existing fraud. He claims he never knew Sterling's true objective. "Convenient," Diana muttered. "But potentially true," I countered. Nathan's ego would never allow him to admit being manipulated. He likely believed he was the mastermind until the very end. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unlisted number. Opening it revealed a single line of text. "Lighthouse. Coffee, 30 minutes. Come alone. K.S. Catherine Sterling. Reaching out directly. Bold, unexpected, and potentially a trap." I considered my options quickly. Meeting Sterling was dangerous but might provide critical intelligence. Not meeting her would leave us reacting to her moves rather than anticipating them. "I need to step out," I announced, gathering my coat. "Diana, continue coordinating the legal team. Marcus, I want satellite surveillance on all Blackwood properties worldwide. Elena, work with the technical team to secure Project Lazarus against any possible breach." Walter Green caught my arm as I moved toward the door. "Where are you going?" "To get answers," I replied simply. The Lighthouse Coffee Shop sat on a quiet corner 10 blocks from Horizon Tower, its weathered exterior and dim lighting making it nearly invisible among the more polished establishments of the financial district. I'd chosen my position carefully, a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances and exits, my back to the wall. At precisely the appointed time, Catherine Sterling walked through the front door. At 58, she remained as imposing as I remembered, tall and elegant, with steel gray hair cut in a severe bob that framed her sharp features. Her tailored charcoal suit spoke of understated power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The only touch of color was a sapphire brooch at her lapel, identical to my earrings, a deliberate choice that didn't escape my notice. "Rebecca," she greeted me, sliding into the seat opposite without waiting for an invitation. "You look well. Marriage obviously agreed with you." "Until it didn't," I replied evenly. "What do you want, Catherine?" She smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. "Direct as ever. That's what I always appreciated about you. No time wasted on pleasantries when there's work to be done." A server approached, but Sterling waved them away without looking. "You've created quite the situation at Horizon. Nathan Porter in custody, Charles Bradley singing like a canary, board members falling over themselves to cooperate with authorities. Impressive work. And yet Vanessa Morgan is in the wind, and Project Lazarus remains at risk," I countered. "Why are you here, Catherine? To gloat? To threaten? Or to make some kind of offer?" Sterling studied me for a long moment. "Do you know why I recruited you to the FBI all those years ago, Rebecca? I saw myself in you, brilliant, meticulous, and perpetually underestimated because of your gender and your youth. I thought you would follow in my footsteps. Until I discovered those footsteps led to corruption and betrayal," I said coldly. "The Senator Dawkins case wasn't dropped because the evidence was compromised. You buried it because you were involved." "I made a strategic decision," Sterling corrected, not bothering to deny the accusation. "Dawkins was a means to an end, nothing more, just as Nathan Porter was for you." The comparison stung more than I wanted to admit. "I didn't marry Nathan as part of some elaborate scheme." "No," Sterling agreed, "but you certainly exploited the opportunity once it presented itself. 15 years is a long time to maintain a cover, even for someone with your talents." "I loved him," I said quietly, "at the beginning, before I discovered who he really was." Something like sympathy flickered across Sterling's face. "I believe you. Just as I believe you're smart enough to understand that what's happening now is far bigger than one man's infidelity or financial fraud." "Project Lazarus," I said. Sterling nodded. "A remarkable achievement. The ability to move unlimited funds across borders instantaneously, without oversight or traditional regulatory constraints. Do you understand the implications?" "I understand that, in your hands, it could destabilize global markets or facilitate the largest financial crime in history," I replied. She laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. "Always thinking too small, Rebecca. That's your one limitation. Lazarus isn't about stealing money. It's about controlling the very systems that determine what money is worth." A chill ran through me as I began to grasp the true scale of Sterling's ambition. "You're targeting central banks." "I prefer to think of it as evolving them," Sterling replied smoothly. "The current financial system is a relic, controlled by governments and institutions that have repeatedly proven themselves incompetent and corrupt. Blackwood offers an alternative, a network of private financial entities operating outside traditional boundaries. A shadow banking system," I translated, "controlled by you and your consortium. Controlled by those with the vision and capability to manage it properly," she corrected, "which could include you, Rebecca." And there it was, the offer I'd been expecting. "You want me to join Blackwood?" Sterling leaned forward, her expression intense. "I want you to help us perfect Lazarus. Your expertise in financial systems and cybersecurity is unmatched. You've already demonstrated your ability to operate undetected for years while building an airtight case. Imagine what you could accomplish with Blackwood's resources behind you. And if I refuse? Then we become adversaries, Sterling said simply. And while I admire your skills, I should remind you that Vanessa Morgan has already provided us with significant access to Lazarus. The question isn't whether we'll proceed, it's whether you'll have any influence over how we use it. I considered my next words carefully. Where is Vanessa now? Safe, Sterling replied with a thin smile. And very motivated to cooperate after Nathan's arrest. Unlike him, she understands the value of aligning herself with the winning side. And Dr. Chen, Horizon's CTO? Also cooperating, though with somewhat more reluctance. His family in Singapore provides useful leverage. The casual admission of what amounted to hostage-taking confirmed the depths to which Sterling was willing to sink. I needed time to process this information, to formulate a response that would keep communication open without committing to anything. I need to consider your offer, I said finally. Sterling nodded, seemingly satisfied. Wise. You have 48 hours. After that, events will be set in motion that cannot be reversed. She stood, adjusting her immaculate suit. Oh, and Rebecca? Don't bother trying to trace this meeting or follow me. The federal agents you stationed across the street and on the roof of the building opposite have been temporarily reassigned. A call from the deputy director himself. With that parting demonstration of her influence, Catherine Sterling walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me with the realization that this game was being played at levels I hadn't fully appreciated. By the time I returned to Horizon Tower, the crisis room was buzzing with new developments. Elena rushed over immediately, her expression urgent. We've confirmed Vanessa's location, she reported. Facial recognition caught her entering a Blackwood subsidiary in Singapore 6 hours ago, and there's more. Dr. Chen was seen with her, appearing to be under duress. Walter Green joined us, looking haggard but determined. While you were gone, we received this. He handed me a tablet displaying what appeared to be transaction logs from Horizon's secure servers. Someone executed a partial extraction of the Lazarus protocols. Approximately 60% of the operating code was copied to an external server. The breach originated from inside our network, added Marcus. Someone with high-level clearance is working with them. I thought of Sterling's confidence, her casual mention of the reassigned federal agents. We have a mole, I concluded. Someone with enough authority to access Lazarus and enough influence to interfere with federal operations. But who? Walter asked. We've removed everyone implicated in the initial fraud. I stared at the transaction logs, recognizing the digital signature of the authorized user who had facilitated the breach. A signature I knew intimately from years of financial forensics work. Not everyone, I said quietly, looking up to meet their expectant gazes. The breach was authorized using a specialized access key belonging to only one person within Horizon's security infrastructure. The room fell silent as I delivered the final blow. The mole is Walter Green himself. Crisis Room fell deadly silent at my accusation. All eyes turned to Walter Green, whose composed exterior showed the first cracks of genuine emotion. Not guilt or anger, but something more complex. That's impossible. Elena was the first to speak, looking between Green and the digital evidence on my screen. Walter has been leading the response team. He's been here the entire time. Not the entire time, I corrected quietly. There was a 30-minute window this morning when Walter left to brief the remaining board members. During that exact time frame, the Lazarus protocols were accessed using his unique security signature. Walter's weathered face remained impassive, but I detected subtle changes in his posture. A slight squaring of the shoulders, a barely perceptible shift in his breathing pattern. Techniques I recognized from my FBI training for maintaining composure Under pressure. "This is absurd," he finally said, his voice steady. "I've given 40 years to Horizon. Why would I betray it now?" "Perhaps because Catherine Sterling has something on you," I suggested. "Or perhaps because you've been working with Blackwood from the beginning." At the mention of Sterling's name, a flicker of recognition crossed his face before he could suppress it. "You had your meeting with her," Walter observed, neither confirming nor denying my accusation. "What did she offer you?" "The same thing she offered you, I imagine," I replied. "A place in the new financial order Blackwood intends to create using Lazarus. The difference is, I declined." Walter studied me for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He laughed, a short, dry sound devoid of humor. "No, Rebecca. Catherine offered you far more than she ever offered me." He settled into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "She offered you partnership. I was only ever an asset to be leveraged." The frank admission stunned the room. Federal agents moved to secure the exits as Walter continued, his voice taking on a reflective quality. "I met Catherine Sterling 33 years ago during the savings and loan crisis. She was a young FBI agent then, brilliant and ambitious. I was a rising executive at Horizon, newly appointed to the board. We worked together to investigate financial crimes that were destabilizing the industry. And then you became more than colleagues," I guessed, seeing the personal angle that had been missing. Walter nodded slightly. "For a time. But our paths diverged. I remained at Horizon while Catherine's ambitions led her elsewhere, first within the Bureau, then to the private sector after the Senator Dawkins scandal." "When did she approach you?" "About Blackwood?" I asked. 2 years ago, after my wife died." A shadow crossed his face. "I was vulnerable. Catherine reappeared in my life, offering understanding and a vision for the future that seemed compelling. A financial system immune to political manipulation and governmental incompetence. And all it would cost was your integrity and the security of the global economy," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Walter's eyes met mine directly. "You're young, Rebecca. You haven't seen what I've seen. Financial systems collapsing. Corrupt politicians bailing out equally corrupt banks while ordinary people lose everything. After a while, the existing structures begin to look fundamentally broken. So you help them infiltrate Horizon," James stated, moving closer with handcuffs ready. "Not initially," Walter replied. "At first, I merely provided information, board, decisions, strategic initiatives, potential vulnerabilities. It was Nathan who unwittingly created the perfect opening with his fraud scheme. I began to see the full picture. You identified Nathan and Vanessa's fraud, but instead of reporting it, you informed Sterling. Catherine saw the opportunity immediately," Walter confirmed. "Nathan's criminal activities made him vulnerable. Vanessa was ambitious and amoral, the perfect recruit. Together, they provided the access needed to initiate the Lazarus Project under Horizon's legitimate research division. While you maintained your position as the respected board chairman, above suspicion," I concluded. "The perfect, inside man." Walter didn't deny it. "I believe in Blackwood's vision, Rebecca. The current financial system is dying. Lazarus offers a genuine alternative. A decentralized network controlled by those with the expertise to manage it properly. Controlled by Catherine Sterling and her consortium of ex-Wall Street predators," I corrected. "There's nothing idealistic about their intentions, Walter. They're not trying to save the financial system, they're attempting to hijack it for their own benefit." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "You don't understand the full scope of what Lazarus can accomplish." "I understand enough," I replied, nodding to James to proceed with the arrest. "And now I need you to understand something. Catherine Sterling used you, just as she used Nathan and Vanessa. You were never a partner, just a means to an end." As the federal agents led Walter away, Diana approached with a concerned expression. This complicates things significantly. Green wasn't just any board member. He was our primary ally in the cleanup operation. More importantly, added Elena, his arrest creates a leadership vacuum at the worst possible moment. The remaining board members are either implicated in the fraud or too junior to take command during a crisis of this magnitude. I stared at the digital evidence of Walter's betrayal, thinking through the implications. Sterling planned this perfectly. First Nathan and his inner circle, then Walter, systematically removing Horizon's leadership structure while simultaneously extracting pieces of Lazarus. What's their endgame? Marcus asked, bringing up satellite imagery of Blackwood's known facilities worldwide. They still don't have complete access to Lazarus. Without the full protocols, they can't implement whatever they're planning. They can't implement it yet, I corrected, a chilling realization forming. But they now have Walter Green, the one person besides Nathan who had comprehensive knowledge of Horizon's security infrastructure. Combined with the partial extraction they've already completed, they could potentially reconstruct the missing components, Elena finished, her expression grim. My phone buzzed with an incoming message. The sender was labeled only as VM, Vanessa Morgan. The message contained a video file. With growing apprehension, I opened it to find Vanessa staring into the camera, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and fear. Rebecca, she began, using my first name with a familiarity that felt like another violation. By now you've discovered Walter Green's involvement and taken him into custody. What you don't yet realize is that his arrest was anticipated and planned for. She held up a tablet displaying a real-time feed of Walter being processed at the federal building. Catherine wanted me to assure you that while Walter has been a valuable asset, his usefulness has come to an end. His final contribution was delivering, the last piece of data we needed before being conveniently removed from the equation. My blood ran cold as I realized we had played directly into Sterling's hands. You have 24 hours, Vanessa continued. Join us willingly, bringing your expertise and insights to the Lazarus implementation, or watch as the existing financial system begins to unravel. Catherine is extending this offer out of respect for your abilities and your shared history. She genuinely believes you belong with Blackwood. Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. As for Nathan, I want you to know our relationship was never personal. He was a means to an end, just as your marriage to him served your purposes. We're not so different, you and I. The comparison hit me like a physical blow. The choice is yours, Rebecca. Cooperation or catastrophe. Catherine will contact you with details for the rendezvous point. The video ended, leaving the crisis room in stunned silence. They planned for Walter's arrest, Diana said finally. We thought we were countering their move, but we were actually completing it. Classic Sterling, I murmured, remembering my former mentor's strategic brilliance. Always thinking 3 moves ahead. What now? Asked Elena. If they truly have everything they need to reconstruct Lazarus? I turned to the room. Decision. We assume the worst, that Blackwood now has functional access to Lazarus and is preparing to deploy it. Our priority is identifying their implementation, timeline, and method. And if Sterling contacts you as promised, James asked carefully. Then I meet with her, I replied simply. But this time, on my terms. I moved to the central console and began pulling up schematics of the Lazarus system. Elena, I need a complete technical analysis of what Blackwood could accomplish with the components they've already stolen. Marcus, compile everything we have on Sterling's known associates and properties worldwide. Diana, prepare legal documentation for emergency intervention with central banks in all 12 countries targeted by Lazarus. As the team dispersed to their assignments, I found myself standing alone at the window, looking out at the city below, a financial hub that had no idea it was potentially hours away from unprecedented chaos. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from James, who had accompanied Walter to federal custody. Green requested to speak with you alone. Says he has critical information about Sterling's true plan. I stared at the message, weighing the possibility it was yet another trap against the chance that Walter, now facing the reality of his situation, might actually provide valuable intelligence. One thing was certain. The game had changed dramatically. What had begun as my personal mission to expose Nathan's betrayal had escalated into a desperate race to prevent a global financial catastrophe. And somewhere out there, Catherine Sterling was watching, waiting to see which side of history I would choose. The federal holding facility was a stark contrast to the luxury Walter Green had surrounded himself with for decades. The interview room, sterile and unadorned save for a metal table and 2 chairs, seemed to diminish him physically. The commanding presence of the distinguished board chairman had been replaced by an elderly man in a standard-issue jumpsuit, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. "You came?" he said as I entered, something like relief in his voice. "You claim to have information about Sterling's true plan," I replied, remaining standing. "I'm listening." Walter gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, Rebecca. This may take some time." I sat reluctantly, keeping my expression neutral. "You have 15 minutes. Federal prosecutors are already preparing charges of conspiracy, wire fraud, and possibly treason, depending on how Blackwood intends to use Lazarus." "Treason," Walter repeated, a bitter smile crossing his face. "Catherine always said the system would use that word when it felt truly threatened. Is that what this is about? Threatening the system?" Walter leaned forward, his eyes suddenly intense. "What do you know about Event Horizon?" The strange question caught me off guard. "The astronomical phenomenon? The point beyond which light cannot escape a black hole? In this context, it's the name of Catherine Sterling's actual plan." Walter replied, "Lazarus is merely a component, a means to an end, not the end itself." My instincts sharpened. This was new information. "Explain." "Catherine doesn't just want to control the financial system, Rebecca. She wants to fundamentally transform it. Event Horizon is a coordinated, simultaneous attack on the 12 central banks connected through Lazarus, designed to trigger a cascading failure of the entire global financial infrastructure." "That's insane," I said, struggling to comprehend the scale of such an attack. "The economic devastation would be unprecedented. Billions of people would be affected." "That's precisely the point," Walter continued. "Catherine calls it creative destruction, the complete collapse of the existing system, creating a vacuum that Blackwood's alternative infrastructure would fill." "And you agreed to this?" I asked incredulously. Walter's gaze dropped to his hands, which trembled slightly. "No, I believed Blackwood was creating a parallel system, a safety net for when the existing structures inevitably failed on their own. The deliberate destruction of the system was never part of what I agreed to." "When did you discover the truth?" 3 days ago. I overheard Catherine on a secure call with her inner circle. They were discussing mortality projections, estimates of how many people might die in the global chaos following Event Horizon. They spoke about it clinically, as if discussing an acceptable level of collateral damage. The cold calculation of, it struck me like a physical blow. "And that's when you began having doubts." Walter nodded slowly. "I confronted Catherine yesterday. She didn't deny it. She simply told me I lacked the courage to do what was necessary. That's when I realized she'd never seen me as a partner, only as a tool to be used and discarded. Like Nathan, I observed. Like all of us, Catherine has always excelled at finding people's vulnerabilities and exploiting them," Walter agreed. "Nathan's greed, my idealism, your sense of justice." I stiffened slightly. "What do you mean? Why do you think Catherine allowed your investigation into Nathan's fraud to proceed unimpeded? She could have shut it down at any point through her contacts in federal law enforcement. Instead, She watched you build your case, knowing it would eventually create the perfect distraction. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. While I had been focused on exposing Nathan and his inner circle, Sterling had been using my investigation as cover for Blackwood's infiltration of Horizon. "When is Event Horizon scheduled to occur?" I asked, my mind already racing through potential countermeasures. "Tomorrow at the market opening, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time," Walter replied. "Simultaneous attacks across all 12 financial centers worldwide. Once initiated, the process is designed to be irreversible. Less than 20 hours. The timeline was even tighter than I'd feared. Where will Sterling be during the attack?" "The Blackwood Command Center in Geneva. It's a converted nuclear bunker from the Cold War era, virtually impenetrable and off the grid. Vanessa will be with her, along with the core technical team." I stood abruptly. "I need to get this information to the response team immediately." "Rebecca," Walter called as I moved toward the door. "There's something else you should know." "About Vanessa Morgan?" I paused, turning back. "She's not who you think she is," Walter said quietly. "Her real name is Vanessa Sterling, Catherine's daughter." The revelation struck me like lightning. Suddenly, countless small details clicked into place. Vanessa's unprecedented rise within Horizon, her manipulation of Nathan, her intimate knowledge of how to evade surveillance. "Catherine recruited her own daughter for this?" I asked, though the answer was already clear. "Catherine raised Vanessa specifically for this role," Walter corrected. "Every aspect of her education, her training, her career trajectory, all designed to position her within the financial system at the perfect moment. Nathan was simply the ideal target for her to exploit." The pieces continued falling into place. "That's why Sterling seemed so confident I would join Blackwood willingly. She expects maternal instinct to override my ethics, the same way she used her daughter to further her own agenda." Walter's expression confirmed my suspicion. In Catherine's mind, the fact that she's willing to sacrifice even her own daughter for her vision proves her commitment to the cause. She expects you to recognize and respect that level of dedication. "She's wrong," I said firmly, though a part of me admired Sterling's strategic brilliance, however twisted. "How many people are in the Geneva bunker?" 22. The core leadership. Team, technical specialists, and security personnel. The facility was designed to sustain them for months if necessary, long enough for the financial chaos to reshape global power structures. I nodded, processing this information. "Thank you, Walter. This helps." "There's one more thing," he said as I reached for the door handle. "Catherine has a contingency plan if you refuse to join them. She plans to release evidence implicating you as the mastermind behind both Nathan's fraud and the Lazarus theft." "What evidence?" "Fabricated, but convincing. Documents, emails, financial records, all meticulously constructed over years, showing you as the hidden architect while using your marriage to Nathan as cover. In her version, Nathan was the unwitting pawn, not the criminal. The audacity of the plan was breathtaking. Sterling had created a shadow narrative that inverted the truth, ready to deploy if I became a threat. "Why are you telling me all this? Now?" I asked. "Why turn against Sterling after years of loyalty?" Walter's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of regret and resolve. "Because despite my mistakes, I believe you're the only person who truly understands Catherine well enough to stop her. You were her protege before you were Nathan's wife. You know how she thinks." Back at the crisis center, I briefed the expanded team, now including senior officials from the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and intelligence agencies. The revelation about Event Horizon had elevated the threat to national security status, mobilizing resources I hadn't dared hope for. "Geneva is outside our jurisdiction," objected the deputy director of the FBI. "Even with this intelligence, we can't launch an operation on Swiss soil without diplomatic clearance that would take days to secure, by which time the attack will have already occurred." I finished for him. I understand the constraints you're operating under. That's why I'm not asking for an official operation. The room grew quiet as my meaning became clear. What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Chen? Asked the Treasury representative carefully. I'm proposing that I accept Catherine Sterling's invitation, I replied. I'll enter the Geneva facility under the pretense of joining Blackwood. Once inside, I can gather intelligence and potentially sabotage Event Horizon from within. That's a suicide mission, Marcus objected immediately. Sterling will never believe you've suddenly changed sides. She won't have to, I countered. Catherine Sterling believes absolutely in her own persuasive abilities. She's convinced that once I understand the full scope of Blackwood's vision, I'll recognize its necessity. That arrogance is our only advantage. Elena approached with a tablet displaying technical schematics. If you could access their central systems even briefly, I could provide you with code that might disrupt the Lazarus protocols. And if you're discovered? Asked Diana, concern evident in her voice. Then you proceed with Plan B, I replied, turning to the Federal Reserve representative. Complete emergency shutdown of all connected banking systems. It would cause significant disruption, but nothing compared to the devastation of Event Horizon. The room fell silent as everyone processed the enormous risks involved. I'll need to be completely convincing, I continued, which means no tracking devices, no communications equipment that might be detected. I'll be on my own once I enter the facility. This isn't what you signed up for, James said quietly. You set out to expose your husband's affair and financial crimes, not to prevent global economic collapse. I thought about the strange path that had led me here, from discovering Nathan's betrayal to uncovering a conspiracy that threatened the entire financial system. From being the underestimated wife to perhaps the only person who could stop Catherine Sterling's master plan. Actually, I replied, this is exactly what I trained for before I ever met Nathan. I was a financial crimes specialist who got sidetracked by marriage. Maybe this was always where I was headed. As the team began preparations, I stepped away to a quiet corner and opened the secure file containing Nathan's most recent interrogation. On the video, he appeared broken, the arrogant, controlling man I had married now reduced to a desperate figure seeking any opportunity to reduce his sentence. I had no idea about Event Horizon, he insisted to the federal investigators. Vanessa only told me we were securing our future. I never knew. I closed the file, feeling nothing but a distant pity for the man who had once dominated my life. Nathan had been a stepping stone in Catherine Sterling's grand design, just as she had intended me to be. The difference was, I refused to play the role she had scripted for me. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message, right on schedule. Decision time. Coordinates attached, 24 hours. Chaos. I took a deep breath and typed my response. I'm in. See you in Geneva. The game was entering its final phase, and this time, I would be the one thinking 3 moves ahead. The private airfield outside Geneva was shrouded in early morning mist, the Swiss Alps barely visible in the distance. The sleek Gulfstream jet that had transported me from Portland touched down with barely a sound, its black exterior unmarked by any corporate logo or identification. I had spent the 7-hour flight mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Reviewing. Everything I knew about Catherine Sterling, about Vanessa, about Blackwood's operations and the Lazarus protocols. Sleep had been impossible, though I had closed my eyes occasionally to project the appearance of calm confidence for the flight attendant, who I assumed was reporting my every move back to Sterling. As the jet taxied to a stop, I checked my appearance, one final time in the compact mirror, not out of vanity but tactical necessity. I had chosen my armor carefully, a charcoal Armani suit similar to Sterling's, hair pulled back in a severe chignon, minimal makeup, professional, confident, and giving nothing away. The only personal touch was my mother's sapphire earrings, a deliberate echo of Sterling's brooch, signaling both respect and a reminder of my own identity. The cabin door opened to reveal a sleek black SUV waiting on the tarmac. A tall man in an impeccable suit approached as I descended the stairs. "Ms. Chen," he greeted me with a slight Swiss-German accent. "I am Friedrich. Welcome to Geneva. Ms. Sterling is eagerly awaiting your arrival." The drive from the airfield took us through the outskirts of Geneva, then away from the city entirely, winding into the mountainous terrain beyond. Friedrich maintained a professional silence throughout the journey, neither offering information, nor responding to my few casual questions about our destination. After nearly an hour, we turned onto an unmarked road that appeared to dead end at the base of a mountain. Friedrich pressed his palm to what looked like an ordinary rock face, revealing a biometric scanner hidden within the stone. A moment later, a section of the mountainside slid open, revealing a tunnel large enough for the SUV to enter. "Impressive," I remarked, maintaining my facade of calm interest while mentally mapping every detail of the facility's entrance. "Mrs. Sterling believes in being thorough," Friedrich replied, navigating the vehicle through the tunnel into a vast underground parking area. "Security is our highest priority." The air inside the mountain was cool and oddly still, filtered through what I guessed to be a sophisticated environmental system designed for a long-term shelter. As we exited the vehicle, I noticed security cameras covering every angle, along with what appeared to be weapons emplacements disguised as architectural features. "This way, please," Friedrich directed, leading me to an elevator embedded in the rock wall. He placed his hand on another scanner, then stepped aside. "You'll need to verify your identity as well." When I hesitated, he smiled thinly. "Your biometrics were added to the system yesterday. Ms. Sterling is nothing if not prepared." I placed my palm against the scanner, wondering how Sterling had obtained my biometric data. The panel glowed green, and the elevator doors slid open. "Ms. Sterling is waiting for you in the command center," Friedrich informed me as we descended deeper into the mountain. "The facility has 5 levels, with the command center on level 3. Living quarters are on levels 4 and 5. The entire complex is self-sustaining, with power, water, and air filtration systems designed to function independently for up to 6 months. In case of economic collapse," I observed. Friedrich's expression remained neutral. "In case of necessity, the elevator opened directly into what could only be described as a war room. A massive circular table dominated the center, surrounded by workstations where a dozen people monitored wall-sized displays showing financial data, news feeds, and what appeared to be real-time surveillance of major financial centers worldwide. And there, standing at the head of the central table, was Catherine Sterling. "Rebecca," she greeted me, her voice carrying across the room with commanding presence. "Right on time. I've always appreciated your punctuality." Beside her stood Vanessa Morgan, or rather Vanessa Sterling, looking simultaneously triumphant and wary. Her resemblance to her mother was suddenly unmistakable now that I knew to look for it. The same sharp cheekbones, the same calculating gaze, though her red hair must have come from her father. "Catherine, Vanessa." I acknowledged them both with a slight nod, deliberately using their true names. "Quite an operation you've built here." "The culmination of 2 decades of planning," Catherine replied, gesturing for me to join them at the table. "What do you think of our little bunker?" "Impressive security," I replied honestly, "though it seems excessive for a simple financial operation." A thin smile crossed Catherine's face. "There's nothing simple about what we're doing here, as I'm sure Walter Green has already explained to you." So she knew about my conversation with Walter. Not surprising, given her apparent reach within federal agencies. "Event Horizon," I said, watching for reactions around the room. Several of the technicians stiffened slightly at the mention of the codename, confirming that not everyone present was fully aware of the plan's true nature. Indeed, Catherine studied me intently. "And knowing the full scope of our intentions, you still chose to come. Why?" The question was a test, one I had anticipated and prepared for. Because you were right about one thing, Catherine. The existing system is fundamentally broken. I've spent years watching the wealthy and powerful manipulate it for their own benefit, including my husband. I moved to the central display, gesturing at the financial data streams. Nathan's fraud wasn't unusual, it was just poorly executed. For every Nathan Porter who gets caught, 100 others continue stealing with impunity, protected by the very institutions meant to regulate them. Catherine's eyes never left mine, searching for any sign of deception. And you believe our solution is the right one? I believe dramatic change is necessary, I replied carefully. And I'm practical enough to recognize that Blackwood is positioned to implement that change, with or without me. I'd rather be part of shaping what comes after than futilely resisting the inevitable. Vanessa stepped forward, clearly skeptical. You expect us to believe you've suddenly abandoned your principles? The woman who spent 3 years building a case against her husband's financial crimes now wants to participate in the largest financial crime in history? I turned to her, allowing a hint of condescension into my expression. My principles haven't changed, Vanessa. I've always believed in accountability and justice. I've simply recognized that working within a corrupt system to achieve those goals is ultimately futile. Looking back to Catherine, I continued, You taught me that, actually. The Senator Dawkins case demonstrated that true power always protects itself. Traditional methods can't create meaningful change. Something like pride flickered in Catherine's eyes. I always knew you'd come to understand eventually. Your marriage to Nathan was an unfortunate detour in your development, but perhaps a necessary one. It showed me what I was fighting against, I agreed. And what I'm willing to fight for. Catherine exchanged a long look with Vanessa, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, she nodded. Very well, let's proceed with orientation. She gestured to a sleek woman with close-cropped silver hair. Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, our chief technical architect. She'll bring you up to speed on the Lazarus implementation. Dr. Shaw approached with a tablet. Ms. Chen, I've prepared a technical briefing on the current status of the Lazarus protocols. We've successfully integrated the components extracted from Horizon, but we could use your expertise on several security vulnerabilities we've identified. Perfect. Exactly the opening I needed. For the next 2 hours, I immersed myself in the technical details of Lazarus, identifying the critical nodes where intervention might be possible. Dr. Shaw seemed genuinely impressed by my insights, unaware that each question I asked was carefully designed to reveal potential weaknesses in their system. You understand the architecture remarkably quickly, she commented as we reviewed the implementation timeline. I've been studying financial security systems for most of my career, I replied truthfully. The principles remain constant even with innovative applications. Catherine rejoined us as the briefing concluded. Impressed, Elizabeth? Very, Dr. Shaw admitted. Ms. Chen's grasp of the underlying protocols is exceptional. As expected, Catherine said, satisfaction evident in her voice. Rebecca was always my most promising protege at the Bureau. Now, I think it's time we showed her the full operation. What followed was a comprehensive tour of the facility. The command center, the server farm housing the Lazarus infrastructure, the communications hub maintaining secure connections with Blackwood operatives worldwide. Each area was a marvel of technology and security, and each revealed new aspects of the Event Horizon plan. By mid-afternoon, I had confirmed my worst fears. Event Horizon wasn't just aimed at destabilizing financial markets, it was designed to trigger cascading failures across interconnected systems: banking, energy, transportation, communications. The resulting chaos would be unprecedented, potentially leading to societal collapse in vulnerable regions. You understand now the necessity of our approach, Catherine said as we returned to the command center. Half measures won't suffice. The system cannot be reformed. It must be rebuilt. At what cost? I asked, allowing some of my genuine horror to show. The humanitarian impact will be significant but temporary, Catherine finished for me. The existing power structures will fall, yes. There will be disruption, hardship, even conflict. But from that necessary chaos, a more rational, equitable system will emerge, one designed by those with the vision to manage it properly. With Blackwood at the helm, I observed. Someone must lead, Catherine replied simply. Better those who understand the mechanics of power than those who pretend it doesn't exist. Before I could respond, an alarm sounded from one of the monitoring stations. A technician called out, "Unauthorized access attempt detected at server node 3. Catherine's expression hardened instantly. Source? Internal, the technician replied, frantically typing commands. The breach originated from within the facility's network. All eyes turned to me. That's unfortunate timing, I remarked calmly, though my heart was racing. I assume you have protocols for identifying the source? Catherine studied me with narrowed eyes, weighing possibilities. After a tense moment, she turned to the security team. Full lockdown. I want every system checked, every access point monitored. No one enters or leaves until we've identified the breach. To me, she added, you'll remain here where I can see you. If this is some misguided attempt to interfere with Event Horizon, if I wanted to sabotage your operation, Catherine, I wouldn't be so obvious, I replied evenly. I've only just arrived and haven't accessed any restricted systems without supervision. The alarm suddenly silenced as another technician called out, false positive. System diagnostics show it was an automated security test, scheduled maintenance protocol that wasn't properly logged. The tension in the room eased slightly, though Catherine's suspicious gaze remained fixed on me. A coincidence, she said, clearly not believing it. A reminder of the system's sensitivity, I countered. Useful information, given my role here. Catherine nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Indeed. Well then, let's continue. Event Horizon initiates in 14 hours. There's still much to prepare. As she turned away to consult with her security team, Vanessa approached me, her voice low and cutting. My mother may believe your convenient conversion, but I don't. Nathan always said you were smarter than you let on. He never knew how right he was. I met her gaze steadily. We all wear masks, Vanessa. Yours as the ambitious young assistant, mine as the oblivious wife. The difference is I always knew I was playing a role. Did you? A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face before she could mask it. We'll be watching you. Closely. I would expect nothing less, I replied with a thin smile. After all, that's exactly what I did with Nathan. The first phase of infiltration was complete. I was inside the facility, gathering intelligence, and mapping vulnerabilities. But the false alarm had heightened security, and the clock was ticking relentlessly toward Event Horizon. Whatever move I was going to make would need to happen soon. Before Catherine Sterling's suspicions overwhelmed her desire to believe I had finally embraced her vision. Night fell over the Geneva facility, though inside the mountain bunker, time was marked only by the digital clocks counting down to market opening and the scheduled launch of Event Horizon. 12 hours remained. Catherine had assigned me private quarters on the 4th level, ostensibly a courtesy befitting my status as a valued new ally. The suite was luxurious but clinically impersonal, with no windows and only a single door that I suspected was monitored continuously. You should rest, Catherine had suggested. Tomorrow will require everyone at peak performance. What she hadn't said, but we both understood, was that these hours alone would be my final test. If I attempted to access restricted systems or communicate with the outside world, the omnipresent surveillance would detect it immediately. Instead, I did exactly what someone genuinely committed to Blackwood's cause would do. I reviewed the technical briefings Dr. Shaw had provided, made notes on potential optimizations to the Lazarus protocols, and prepared questions for the morning brief. All while searching for the one vulnerability that might allow me to disrupt Event Horizon. 3 hours into this performance, A soft knock at my door broke the silence. "Enter," I called, closing the confidential files and assuming a neutral expression. To my surprise, it was Vanessa who stepped into the room, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of expensive scotch. "I thought you might want this," she said, setting the glasses down on the desk. "It's been an intense day." I regarded her cautiously. "Thank you, though I'm surprised by the gesture, given your obvious suspicions about my conversion." Vanessa poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into each glass. "Perhaps I'm hoping to lower your defenses and get you to reveal your true intentions? Or perhaps you're hoping I'll drink enough to make a mistake," I countered, taking the glass but not drinking. A small smile played on her lips. "Mother always said you were perceptive." I set the glass down untouched. "What do you want, Vanessa?" She sank into the chair opposite mine, suddenly looking younger than her 26 years. "To understand you, I suppose. The woman who spent 15 years with Nathan Porter while secretly building a case against him. The FBI prodigy who walked away from a promising career to become a corporate wife, only to re-emerge at the perfect moment to dismantle everything my mother has built. Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I think you're playing a very long game," she replied, studying me over the rim of her glass. "The question is which side you're actually playing for." I leaned back, assessing the young woman before me. Despite her practiced poise, I could see signs of strain, slight shadows under her carefully made-up eyes, a barely perceptible tension in her shoulders. "You're very much like your mother," I observed. "The same strategic mind, the same ability to compartmentalize emotions." Something flashed in her eyes. Pride, resentment, or perhaps both. I've spent my life trying to live up to her expectations, including seducing Nathan Porter as part of her plan. Vanessa's laugh held no humor. Nathan was predictable, a powerful man with an ego larger than his intellect, the type who can't resist a younger woman who hangs on his every word and makes him feel like a genius. While his wife was too busy with charity events to notice, I added, completing the picture she'd created for Nathan. Exactly. She took another sip of scotch. Though it turns out his wife was noticing everything. Tell me, was it difficult? Maintaining that facade for so long? The question felt genuine, almost vulnerable. A calculated attempt to build rapport, perhaps, but with a kernel of real curiosity. More difficult than I expected, I admitted, offering a truth that might build trust. There were moments I almost broke character, when he would mock my supposed inability to understand financial matters, or when he'd dismiss my opinions in public. Times I wanted to let the mask slip and show him exactly who he was underestimating. Vanessa nodded, recognition in her eyes. I felt the same with the junior analysts at Horizon, the ones with half my qualifications but twice my confidence because they were men in expensive suits. Having to pretend I needed their explanations for concepts I'd mastered years ago. For a moment, we shared a genuine connection, 2 intelligent women who had hidden their capabilities for different purposes. "Why are you really here, Vanessa?" I asked again, more gently this time. She swirled the remaining scotch in her glass, watching the liquid catch the light. "Mother believes you've joined us because you've finally embraced her vision for a new financial order. I think your motivations are more personal." "You think I'm here for revenge against her? For recruiting you to seduce my husband?" "No," Vanessa replied, fixing me with an appraising look. "I think you're here because of what happened 8 years ago, the Senator Dawkins case." The mention of that pivotal moment caught me off guard. "What do you know about Dawkins?" "I know it was the case that drove you away from the Bureau and, by extension, from my mother's mentorship. I know the evidence against Dawkins mysteriously disappeared after Mother intervened, and I know you never forgave her for it." "The evidence didn't disappear," I corrected quietly. "It was buried to protect more powerful interests." Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dropping. "What if I told you that wasn't the full story? That the Dawkins case was connected to something larger, something that led directly to Blackwood and Event Horizon? My pulse quickened, though I kept my expression neutral. "I'm listening." "Not here," Vanessa whispered, glancing meaningfully at the ceiling where surveillance devices were undoubtedly hidden. "Meet me in the server room on level 2 in 1 hour. Section C has a maintenance cycle scheduled. The cameras will be offline for 12 minutes. Without waiting for my response, she stood and collected both glasses. "Think about what I've said, Rebecca. There are layers to this operation that even Mother's inner circle doesn't understand." After she left, I remained motionless, my mind racing through possibilities. Was this a genuine overture from someone with doubts about Event Horizon, or an elaborate trap designed to test my loyalty? The timing was suspicious, exactly when I needed access to the server infrastructure. Too convenient to be coincidence. Yet the mention of the Dawkins case felt significant. Few people knew how deeply that betrayal had affected me, how it had shattered my idealism about working within the system. If Vanessa was offering information that connected those events to Blackwood's current plans, it could provide crucial context for stopping Event Horizon. The risk was substantial. If this was a trap, I would lose my only chance to sabotage the operation from within. But if Vanessa was genuinely reaching out, perhaps harboring her own doubts about her mother's plan, ignoring the opportunity could be an even greater mistake. I spent the next 45 minutes in careful preparation, reviewing the facility, schematics I'd memorized, and developing contingency plans for every scenario I could anticipate. At precisely the appointed time, I made my way to level 2, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with purposeful confidence. Anyone monitoring my movements would see a new team member familiarizing herself with the facility. Nothing suspicious about that. The server room in Section C hummed with the sound of high-performance computing equipment, banks of blinking lights, stretching in ordered rows. The air was cool, carefully climate-controlled to protect the sensitive hardware that would soon execute Event Horizon. Vanessa was already there, standing before a central console, her back to the door. She turned at the sound of my footsteps, her expression unreadable. "You came," she said simply. "I'm curious about the connection between Senator Dawkins and Event Horizon," I replied, remaining near the door. "Though I'm still not convinced this isn't an elaborate test of my loyalty." "It's not a test," Vanessa said, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "It's a choice." She turned to the console and typed a rapid sequence of commands. The main display shifted to show a document I recognized immediately, the sealed evidence file from the Dawkins investigation, which had mysteriously disappeared from the FBI's secure server 8 years ago. "How did you get this?" I demanded, moving closer despite my wariness. "Mother keeps meticulous records of every operation, every person she's ever leveraged or compromised. Insurance, she calls it." Vanessa typed another command, bringing up additional files. Senator Dawkins was just the beginning, a test case for a methodology that became Blackwood's standard operating procedure. The screen filled with names and dates, prominent politicians, regulators, banking executives, all with one thing in common. They had been in positions to challenge financial institutions implicated in the 2008 economic crisis, and all had subsequently changed their positions after unexplained private meetings. "Blackmail," I breathed, recognizing the pattern. Vanessa nodded grimly. "Systemic and strategic. Mother didn't just want to protect individual bad actors. She was identifying leverage points within the regulatory structure. Pressure applied in precisely the right places to ensure reform efforts would fail." Why? Catherine was FBI. She was supposed to be enforcing financial regulations, not undermining them. "Because she believes the system is fundamentally corrupt and beyond salvation through conventional means," Vanessa replied. Each failure of regulation, each thwarted attempt at meaningful reform, helped her recruit more people to her vision of controlled demolition and rebuilding. I studied the documents, tracing connections between events I had witnessed and the hidden manipulations that had shaped them. "And you're showing me this because—" Vanessa took a deep breath. "Because Event Horizon isn't what my mother claims it is. It's not about creating a more equitable financial system. It's about consolidating power for Blackwood and its inner circle." "You've just realized this?" I asked skeptically. "No," she admitted, her composure cracking slightly. "I've suspected for months, but confirmation came only recently, when I accessed the final protocols for the post-collapse transition. The new system they're building favors the ultra-wealthy even more than the current one. The suffering Event Horizon will cause. It's not a necessary evil for positive change. It's simply collateral damage and a power grab." The sincerity in her voice was compelling, but I remained cautious. "Why turn against your mother now, after everything you've done to further her plans?" Vanessa's eyes met mine directly. "Because I finally understood that I've been as manipulated as everyone else. My entire life, my education, my career, my relationship with Nathan, all orchestrated to serve her vision. I've been a pawn, not a partner." The realization struck me with unexpected force. Despite everything, I felt a surge of empathy for the young woman before me. Catherine Sterling had shaped her daughter as ruthlessly as she had attempted to shape me, the protégé who got away. "What are you proposing?" I asked cautiously. "Help me modify the Lazarus protocols," Vanessa replied, gesturing to the terminal. "I have access, but not your expertise in security systems. Together, we could insert a kill switch, something that would allow us to abort Event Horizon at the last moment if necessary." I considered her proposal, weighing sincerity against potential deception. "And if this is a trap? If you're testing my loyalty on your mother's orders?" Vanessa's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we both lose. But if I'm genuine, and you reject this chance to stop Event Horizon, billions of people will suffer the consequences." The security camera in the corner remained dark, just as she had promised. The maintenance cycle provided our only window of opportunity. Time was running out. I had to decide whether to trust Vanessa Sterling, the woman who had seduced my husband as part of her mother's grand scheme, now potentially offering redemption for us both. "Show me the code," I said finally, moving to the terminal. "We have 10 minutes before the cameras reactivate." With the countdown to Event Horizon continuing relentlessly, I began what might be our only chance to sabotage Catherine Sterling's decades-long plan from within. The minutes in the server room passed with excruciating slowness as I worked furiously. At the terminal, my fingers flying across the keyboard while Vanessa kept watch for any unexpected security sweeps. "How much longer?" she whispered, anxiety evident in her voice. "The maintenance cycle ends in 3 minutes. "Almost there," I replied, not looking up from the screen. The code for the Lazarus protocols was elegant but complex, deliberately structured to resist interference. I was inserting what appeared to be a minor update to the security verification process. Innocent-looking enough to pass casual inspection, but designed to create a fatal exception when the system attempted to initiate simultaneous connections to all 12 central banks. "Will it work?" Vanessa asked, moving closer to view my work. "If no one detects it before implementation, yes," I confirmed, making the final adjustments. "The system will appear to initialize normally, but will fail at the critical junction. Point. The kill switch is tied to this authentication signature, your mother's own security credentials, ironically enough." Vanessa's expression was a mixture of determination and regret. She's always been so careful about security, using her own credentials to sabotage her life's work. "Poetic justice," I observed, pressing the final command to commit the changes. The system processed for a moment, then displayed confirmation that the update had been accepted. "It's done," I said quietly, erasing all traces of our access from the terminal logs. "Now we just need to maintain our cover until—" The lights in the server room suddenly shifted to red, and a silent alarm indicator began flashing on the main console. "That's not possible," Vanessa breathed, her face paling. "The security systems shouldn't be back online for another minute at least." The realization hit me instantly. Unless the maintenance cycle was shortened, or never existed at all. The door to the server room slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing Catherine Sterling flanked by Friedrich and two armed security personnel. Her expression was one of profound disappointment mingled with grudging respect. Rebecca, she said, shaking her head slowly. "I gave you every opportunity to join us genuinely, to be part of something historic." "It's not what you think, Mother." Vanessa stepped forward quickly. "I was testing her loyalty. I fabricated concerns about Event Horizon to see if she would attempt sabotage." The desperate lie hung in the air for a moment before Catherine dismissed it with a subtle gesture. "Please don't insult my intelligence, Vanessa. I've been monitoring your growing doubts for weeks. This little rebellion isn't entirely unexpected." I remained silent, mentally calculating escape routes and finding none. The server room had only one entrance, now blocked by Sterling's security team. Any attempt to fight our way out would be futile. "I'm curious, though," Catherine continued, her gaze fixed on me with clinical detachment. "How did you turn my daughter against me in such a short time? What leverage did you discover?" "I didn't turn her against you," I replied honestly. "Vanessa made her own decision when she discovered the truth about Event Horizon." Catherine's eyebrow arched slightly. "And what truth would that be?" "That it's not about creating a better system," Vanessa interjected, finding her courage. "It's about power consolidation for you and the Blackwood Inner Circle. The new financial architecture you're building benefits the same ultra-wealthy elites who control the current one." A thin smile played across Catherine's lips. "Of course it does. Did you truly believe we were engaged in some idealistic crusade to redistribute global wealth?" "That was never the objective." "Then what was?" I asked, genuinely curious about her motivation after all these years. "Control," Catherine replied simply. "Predictability. The current financial system is vulnerable to democratic impulses, regulatory overreach, and the occasional bout of populist reform. The post-Event Horizon architecture eliminates those vulnerabilities by placing control firmly in the hands of those who understand how markets actually function. The same hands that caused the 2008 financial crisis, I observed. The same corrupt players you once investigated as an FBI agent." Catherine's expression hardened slightly. "I learned during those investigations that the true power wasn't with the elected officials or even the banking executives I was pursuing. It was with the system architects, the handful of people who designed the frameworks within which everyone else operated. That's the position Blackwood will occupy after tomorrow." She gestured to the security team. "Secure them both in the level 5 containment suite. Full surveillance, no communication access." As the guards moved to escort us, I made one final attempt. "The sabotage is already complete, Catherine. The Lazarus protocols will fail when initiated." Catherine smiled, genuinely amused. "Do you think I didn't anticipate something like this? The server you accessed is a decoy, a parallel development environment we created specifically to entrap any potential saboteurs. The real Lazarus infrastructure is air-gapped and secured elsewhere in the facility." My heart sank as I realized we had accomplished nothing. Worse, we had exposed our intentions without achieving any meaningful disruption to Event Horizon. As we were led from the server room, Catherine called after us, "Don't worry about missing the main event. I'll make sure you both have monitors in your cells to watch history unfold." The containment suite on level 5 proved to be a euphemism for a sophisticated prison cell, comfortable by detention standards but unmistakably designed to hold unwilling occupants. The door was sealed with the same biometric security used throughout the facility, and the ventilation system was clearly designed to allow for the introduction of sedatives if necessary. I'm sorry, Vanessa said once we were alone, sinking onto one of the two narrow beds that furnished the space. This is my fault. I should have anticipated she was watching me. It was always a risk, I replied, examining our surroundings for any potential weakness. Catherine didn't build her operation by being careless or trusting. Even with her own daughter, Vanessa said bitterly. I paused in my assessment of the room to look at her directly. Especially with her daughter. You were her greatest creation, raised and molded specifically for her purposes. That makes you the greatest potential threat if you ever turned against her. Vanessa's gaze dropped to her hands. She never saw me as a daughter, just an asset, a tool cultivated for maximum utility. She looked up suddenly, a realization dawning. Just like she saw you. The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Catherine had indeed attempted to mold me in, her image during my time at the FBI. Her most promising protégé, the logical successor to her legacy. The difference is, I walked away, I replied, and now she'll never trust either of us again. It doesn't matter, Vanessa said, despair evident in her voice. In 8 hours, Event Horizon launches. Without access to the real Lazarus protocols, we can't stop it. I resumed my examination of the cell, running my fingers along the seams where walls met ceiling. Then we need to find another way out of here and reach the actual server infrastructure. There is no other way out, Vanessa replied. These containment suites were designed to hold high-value prisoners during the anticipated post-collapse. Unrest. They're escape-proof. I smiled thinly. Nothing is truly escape-proof. It's just a question of resources, determination, and… I paused, noticing something unexpected near the environmental control panel, and overlooked details. Moving. Closer to the panel, I examined what appeared to be a standard temperature control unit. But the installation showed subtle signs of rushed work. The panel wasn't perfectly flush with the wall, and the sealant around its edges was still slightly tacky. Recent addition? I asked, pointing to the panel. Vanessa frowned, considering. Yes, actually. There was an issue with the climate control system last week. Maintenance crews were working throughout Level 5 for several days. Standard security protocol would require all work to be inspected and verified before the rooms were cleared for use, I noted. But with Event Horizon approaching and everyone focused on final preparations, corners might have been cut, Vanessa finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. Working carefully, I pried at the edges of the panel until it came loose, revealing not just the expected environmental controls, but a service access tunnel beyond. Narrow, but navigable. Likely connected to the main ventilation and utility conduits that ran throughout the facility. Maintenance shortcut, I explained, a small surge of triumph coursing through me. Rather than going through the full security protocols to enter and exit these rooms multiple times during repairs, they created a temporary access point and forgot to properly reseal it afterward, Vanessa added, a hint of hope returning to her voice. Exactly. The question is, where does this lead, and can we use it to reach the actual Lazarus servers? Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, visualizing the facility layout she had memorized. The main utility conduits connect all 5 levels. If we can reach the central junction on Level 3, we could potentially access the secure server room where the actual Lazarus system is housed. And the security in that room? Biometric, retinal scan, palm print, and voice recognition. Limited to my mother and Dr. Shaw. I considered this obstacle. Can you bypass it? Vanessa hesitated. Not the full biometric suite, but there might be another way. The emergency override protocols allow for system access during a critical facility failure. If we could trigger a convincing enough emergency, like a fire in the central ventilation system, I suggested, eyeing the narrow maintenance tunnel. For the first time since our capture, a genuine smile crossed Vanessa's face. That would certainly qualify. I glanced at the digital clock on the wall, counting down the hours until market opening. We have 7 hours and 22 minutes to reach the central junction, trigger an emergency, access the secure server room, and disable Lazarus before Event Horizon initiates. While avoiding security patrols, automated surveillance, and my mother's considerable foresight, Vanessa added, the enormity of the challenge evident in her tone. I began removing the panel completely, creating an opening just large enough to squeeze through. One impossible task at a time. As I prepared to enter the narrow utility tunnel, Vanessa placed a hand on my arm. Why are you doing this, Rebecca? After everything that's happened, Nathan, my deception, my mother's manipulation, why? Risk your life to stop Event Horizon? I paused, considering the question seriously. Because 15 years ago, I made a choice to walk away when I discovered corruption at the highest levels. I told myself I was taking a principled stand, but in truth, I was retreating. I let Catherine win then. I won't make the same mistake twice. With that, I slipped into the darkness of the maintenance tunnel, Vanessa close behind me. Our unlikely alliance, the betrayed wife and the young girlfriend who had replaced her, now represented the last hope of preventing Catherine Sterling's vision of controlled global chaos from becoming reality. The maintenance tunnel was even narrower than it had appeared from our cell, forcing us to crawl through accumulated dust and cobwebs. The air was stale and uncomfortably warm, carrying the faint hum of the facility's environmental systems. Left at the next junction, Vanessa whispered from behind me. That should connect to the main utility conduit for Level 4. Following her directions, we navigated the labyrinthine network of service passages. Our progress was painfully slow, each movement measured to minimize noise that might alert security to our escape. How much farther to the central junction? I asked, pausing to wipe sweat from my forehead. 2 more levels down, Vanessa replied. But we'll need to be careful at the transition points between levels. They're likely to have motion sensors at those junctions. She was right. As we approached the access point to Level 4, I spotted the telltale red glow of a security sensor mounted above the hatch. Standard motion detection, I observed. Probably tied directly to the central security system. Vanessa crawled up beside me, examining the sensor. Can you bypass it? Not without tools, I admitted. But we might not need to. I pointed to a bundle of cables running alongside the tunnel. Those are primary power conduits for this section. If we could create a localized power fluctuation, understanding dawned in Vanessa's eyes. It would trigger a diagnostic cycle in the security system. Standard protocol calls for a 30-second reset. Exactly. Long enough for us to get through if we move quickly. Working together, we carefully exposed a section of the power conduit. Using a piece of metal I'd pried loose from the environmental panel in our cell, I created a momentary short circuit. The lights in the tunnel flickered, and the red glow of the motion sensor went dark. Now, I urged, pushing the hatch open and sliding through to the Level 4 conduit. Vanessa followed immediately behind me, pulling the hatch closed just as the security system reset with a soft electronic chime. We repeated this process at the transition to Level 3, timing our movements with precision. Each level brought us closer to the heart of the facility and to Catherine Sterling's true operation. Finally, we reached the central junction, a nexus where the facility's primary systems converged. Ventilation ducts, power conduits, and data lines all intersected in this space, creating a chaotic tangle of infrastructure. The secure server room is directly above us, Vanessa whispered, pointing to a reinforced ceiling panel. That's where the air-gapped Lazarus system is housed. I examined our surroundings, quickly formulating a plan. You mentioned triggering an emergency to access the override protocols. What would be most effective? Vanessa considered for a moment. Fire suppression would be too localized. We need something that would impact multiple systems simultaneously, She pointed to a cluster of data servers humming in a climate-controlled enclosure. Those are environmental control systems. If they detected a critical temperature increase in multiple sectors, it would trigger a facility-wide emergency protocol, I finished. Can you access those systems from here? I can, but any changes would be logged and traced back to my credentials immediately. I smiled grimly. We're already fugitives within the facility. At this point, stealth matters less than speed. Vanessa nodded, understanding the calculus of our desperate situation. She moved to a nearby terminal and began typing rapidly, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she navigated layers of security protocols. I'm overriding the temperature sensors for levels 2 through 5, she explained, her voice tight with concentration. Setting them to report critical overheating in all environmental systems. Within moments, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red emergency lights pulsed in the corridor beyond our hidden position, and automated announcements urged personnel to move to designated safety areas. Environmental system failure detected. All personnel evacuate to safety zones. Emergency protocols initiated. Vanessa continued typing, her expression intense. They'll realize it's a false alarm within minutes. We need to move now. We climbed through an access panel into the main corridor, now bathed in pulsing red light. The chaos of the emergency alert provided perfect cover as we moved purposefully toward the secure server room, dressed in maintenance coveralls we'd taken from a storage locker in the utility tunnel. Approaching the server room, I muttered, keeping my head down as we passed confused Blackwood personnel hurrying in the opposite direction. What's our access plan? Emergency override, Vanessa replied under her breath. Access panel to the right of the main door. During a facility-wide alert, the system defaults to basic authentication rather than full biometrics. As we reached the imposing security door that guarded the heart of Lazarus, I could feel the weight of the moment. Beyond this barrier lay the culmination of Catherine Sterling's decades-long plan and our last chance to prevent global catastrophe. Vanessa moved to the emergency panel and entered a complex series of commands. The panel flashed red, then yellow, then green as the system processed the override request. Security protocols temporarily downgraded due to facility emergency, an automated voice announced. Please provide authentication. Vanessa placed her palm on the scanner, holding her breath. After a tense moment, the scanner glowed green, and the massive door began to slide open. We're in, she breathed, relief evident in her voice. The secure server room was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, silent, pristine, and bathed in the blue glow of dozens of specialized computing units. At the center stood a sealed glass enclosure containing a single terminal, the air-gapped control station for Lazarus. That's it, Vanessa whispered, moving toward the enclosure. The actual implementation of the Lazarus protocols. As we approached the terminal, a slow clapping sound echoed through the room. From a shadowed corner, Catherine Sterling emerged, her expression a mixture of admiration and disappointment. Impressive, she said, continuing to clap slowly. Using the environmental systems to trigger an emergency override, creating a diversion that would clear your path to this room. I truly underestimated your combined resourcefulness. It's over. Catherine, I said, stepping protectively in front of Vanessa. We're shutting down Lazarus. Catherine smiled thinly. Are you? And how exactly do you plan to access the terminal? The enclosure requires my biometric signature, retinal scan, voice print, and DNA verification. We'll find a way, I insisted, though the challenge seemed insurmountable. No, you won't, Catherine replied calmly. Not in the time remaining. She gestured to a digital display on the wall, counting down the minutes to mark it opening. Just over 1 hour remained. Why are you here alone? I asked, searching for any advantage. Where's your security team? I sent them to help with the evacuation, Catherine replied. I knew this false alarm was your doing, and I suspected you'd target this room. I wanted this final conversation to be private, between mentor and protege. Her gaze shifted between Vanessa and me. Both of you. Vanessa moved to stand beside me, her voice steady as she addressed her mother. You don't have to do this. There's still time to stop Event Horizon. Catherine's expression softened slightly as she looked at her daughter. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't just about financial systems or power structures. This is about evolution, the necessary destruction of outdated frameworks to make room for something better. Better for whom? I challenged myself. The same elites who have always controlled the system? For those who understand how to manage complex systems without the interference of populist sentiment or short-term political thinking, Catherine corrected. The current global infrastructure is collapsing under its own contradictions. Event Horizon simply accelerates the inevitable while ensuring that what emerges afterward is coherent rather than chaotic. At the cost of how many lives? Vanessa asked, her voice breaking slightly. Fewer than would be lost in the slow-motion collapse that's already underway, Catherine insisted, her conviction absolute. This is mercy, not malice. I studied the woman before me, my former mentor, the architect of a plan decades in the making, a brilliant mind that had chosen a path of calculated destruction over the harder work of reform. You really believe that, I observed, not as a question, but a realization. With every fiber of my being, Catherine confirmed. Which is why I know you won't succeed in stopping it. Every contingency has been planned for, every vulnerability addressed. Lazarus will initiate precisely. She glanced at the countdown. 57 minutes, regardless of what happens in this room. Including if something happens to you? I asked quietly. Catherine's smile was almost maternal in its indulgence. The system is fully automated at this point. My presence isn't required for implementation, but something in her expression, a subtle tightening around the eyes, an almost imperceptible shift in posture, told me she wasn't being entirely truthful. Vanessa noticed it too. You're lying, she said suddenly. There's a final authorization. Step, isn't there? Some verification that only you can provide. The momentary flicker in Catherine's eyes confirmed our suspicion. A failsafe, I realized. One last checkpoint to ensure Event Horizon couldn't be initiated without your explicit approval. You built in a kill switch after all. A prudent precaution, Catherine admitted after a moment. But irrelevant now. I have no intention of using it. You have to, Vanessa pleaded, taking a step toward her mother. When you see what Event Horizon will really do, the suffering it will cause. I've calculated that suffering precisely, Catherine interrupted, her voice hardening. I've weighed it against the alternatives. This is the only viable path forward. As they continued their increasingly heated exchange, I observed the secure terminal enclosure more carefully, noticing something Catherine likely assumed we wouldn't recognize, a subtle blue glow beneath the main console, identical to the emergency override panels we'd used to enter the room. There's another way, I said suddenly, interrupting their argument. We don't need to convince you, Catherine. We just need to outlast you. Catherine's expression shifted to one of genuine curiosity. Meaning? I gestured to the countdown clock. In 53 minutes, the financial markets open, and Lazarus initiates. But first, it requires your final authorization, a deliberate action you must take. If we simply prevent you from providing that authorization until after the scheduled launch window, Event Horizon collapses, Vanessa finished, understanding my strategy. The synchronized attack on all 12 financial centers is what creates the cascading failure. If the window is missed, the entire operation fails. Catherine's calm demeanor cracked for the first time, confirming we had identified a genuine vulnerability. 3 people in this room, she said, reaching into her jacket. Only one needs to access that terminal. The pistol she produced was small, but undoubtedly lethal at close range. I genuinely regret this, she said, raising the weapon. Both of you showed such potential. What happened next occurred with breathtaking speed. As Catherine aimed the pistol, Vanessa lunged forward, knocking her mother's arm upward. The shot went wild, striking one of the overhead lights in a shower of sparks. I moved simultaneously, diving for the security panel I'd spotted beneath the terminal enclosure. Catherine fought with surprising strength for her age, struggling to regain control of the weapon as Vanessa grappled with her. "The override!" Vanessa shouted, managing to keep her mother's aim directed away from me. "Same code as the door, 84731. My fingers flew across the emergency panel, inputting the override code. The system hesitated, then responded with a green confirmation light. The sealed glass enclosure began to retract. No. Catherine broke free from Vanessa's grip, turning the pistol toward me as I reached for the exposed terminal. Time seemed to slow as I lunged for the keyboard, aware of Catherine taking aim in my peripheral vision. A shot rang out, but it was Catherine who staggered backward, a look of shock crossing her face as she sank to her knees. Behind her stood Vanessa, holding a second pistol she had taken from her mother's jacket during their struggle. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as Catherine collapsed to the floor, blood spreading across her immaculate suit from a wound in her side. With trembling hands, I accessed the Lazarus terminal, navigating to the core protocols that would initiate Event Horizon. The system was elegant in its deadly simplicity, a masterpiece of destructive engineering. "Can you disable it?" Vanessa asked, keeping the pistol trained on her wounded but still conscious mother. "I don't need to," I replied, finally understanding. The failsafe Catherine had built into her own system. She already did. On the screen before me was a simple authorization prompt, requiring Catherine Sterling's final approval to activate Event Horizon. But the system architecture revealed something she had kept hidden from everyone, including her inner circle at Blackwood. "You never intended for anyone else to be able to initiate Lazarus," I said, turning to Catherine. "No matter what happened, you ensured the final decision would always be yours alone." Catherine's laugh was weak, but still carried her characteristic confidence. "Of course, I would never create a system this powerful without maintaining absolute control." Her gaze shifted to Vanessa, a complex emotion crossing her face. "Not even for my daughter." The countdown continued relentlessly. 32 minutes remained until the scheduled launch of Event Horizon. But without Catherine's authorization, the Lazarus protocols would remain dormant. "It's over," I said simply, stepping away from the terminal. Event Horizon fails. As security alarms continued to blare throughout the facility, I used the terminal to send an emergency message to the Federal Task Force providing our exact location and situation. Within minutes, we heard the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching the mountain facility. Catherine Sterling watched me with a mixture of anger and reluctant admiration as her life's work collapsed around her. "You were always my most promising student," she said quietly. "The one who got away." "No," I corrected her. "I was the one who saw through you." As federal agents secured the facility and medical personnel attended to Catherine's wound, Vanessa stood apart, her expression hollow. With the weight of what she had done, I moved to her side, understanding the complicated grief she was experiencing. "She'll survive," I said gently. "And she'll face justice for what she's done." "What we've done," Vanessa corrected, not meeting my eyes. "I was part of this. I helped build Lazarus. I manipulated Nathan and others at Horizon. And in the end, you helped stop it," I reminded her. "That counts for something." In the chaos of the federal takeover, as Blackwood personnel were detained and the facility's systems secured, Vanessa and I stood together. The betrayed wife and the young girlfriend who had replaced her, now united by a shared experience of manipulation and redemption. "What happens now?" she asked as we were escorted from the secure server room. I thought about the long path that had led me here, from discovering Nathan's betrayal to unraveling a conspiracy that threatened the global economy. From the underestimated wife to the woman who had helped prevent catastrophe. Justice, I replied simply, for all of us. In the days that followed, the full scope of Blackwood's operation was revealed to the world. Catherine Sterling and her inner circle faced charges of conspiracy, financial terrorism, and countless other crimes. The 12 central banks targeted by Lazarus implemented new security protocols to protect against similar threats in the future. Nathan Porter, testifying from federal custody in exchange for a reduced sentence, expressed shock at the true scale of the conspiracy he had unwittingly supported. His affair with Vanessa, once the source of my greatest pain, now seemed almost trivial in comparison to what had followed. As for me, I reclaimed my identity as Rebecca Chen, financial crimes specialist. The skills I had honed during 15 years of marriage to Nathan, patience, observation, and the ability to see beyond facades, proved invaluable in my new role advising financial institutions on security vulnerabilities. And Vanessa Sterling, granted limited immunity in exchange for her cooperation, began the long process of building an identity separate from her mother's influence and ambitions. Two women from opposite sides of a betrayal, both manipulated by forces larger than ourselves, had found an unexpected alliance in the struggle against a common enemy. The man who had replaced me with his young girlfriend had inadvertently set in motion events that would reveal the darkest secrets of all, and ultimately lead to something resembling justice. Sometimes, I reflected as I watched the sun rise over the city skyline from my new office, the path to redemption begins with betrayal. And sometimes the person who underestimates you becomes the unwitting architect of your greatest triumph. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.